Good evening and welcome to Deep Space Wine. I am Kat and I bring a fresh, aka naive and foolish newcomer's view to Deep Space Nine as I watch each episode for the first time shortly before recording. And I'm joined by Tim, who is a Star Trek veteran having watched Deep Space Nine since it first aired in the UK in the early 90s. And tonight we will be taking you a scene at a time through Season 2, Episode 1, The Homecoming, which first aired on the 27th of September 1993. It was directed by Winrich Colby, who also directed All Good Things, the final TNG episode, and directed episodes of 4 different kinds of Star Trek. It was written by Jerry Taylor as a story which was originally intended to be a one-shot story for TNG and was adapted for Deep Space Nine by Ira Stephen Bear, who wrote the screenplay. We've got a content warning for this one, a few content warnings for this one, a surprisingly respectful incident of a character pretending to be a sex worker. There are phasers fired, minor injury by phaser, an incident of mugging where a character is physically grabbed and held down by 3 other people. A character is branded on screen, although he recovers very quickly, and there is some hand-to-hand combat. And also, one other thing, I found out on Wikipedia this time that both Tim and I have been pronouncing Nana Visitor's name wrong. I think Tim's been sticking with Nana, like banana. I've been doing Nana, like an English grandma. And now it's Nana, like ta-da. So, Nana
Apologies.
Visitor.
And we will observe that correctly going forward.
We'll try. We will do our best. We'll also try not to get Lee Nallis's name wrong, because I keep reverting to calling him Nallis as if that were his surname. Of course, Bajoran names have surname first, personal name second. So we will do our best in both cases.
Thank you.
Yeah, shall we do first impressions before we dive in?
Sure, please. I just spoke through the entire episode summary, so if you want to jump in with first thoughts, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I keep kind of toing and froing about this episode. I think that on a first watch, I was a little disappointed because I really love the episodes that are strongly based around characters on Deep Space Nine. I like the main cast. And one of the things I really want to get out of Season 2 is seeing more of them. I want to see them developing and interacting more. And I felt that this one, mainly being focused on an outsider who we don't learn much about, is kind of defining feature is that he's just some guy who got caught up in a situation that got out of hand. So he's not the most interesting central point for an episode. But watching it again, there are a lot of lovely little instances of interaction between the main characters. There's a lot of little bits of information just kind of fed in there, which I think just kind of pebbles given a little nudge that are going to avalanche as the season goes on. So yeah, I do really enjoy it. I think it's very well put together. It is entertaining as the plot develops. There's a lot to like about it. I think that I didn't notice as much fantastic editorial stuff as I often look for in episodes, but there is the odd 1 or 2 bits that I enjoyed. So yeah, it's a good, solid episode. And it was never going to be better than The Emissary, the opening episode of Season 1, which is, you can't
phenomenal.
have every season opener be an absolute banger, because where do you go after that?
It's going to be interesting, actually. I feel like now we're going to get into the habit of always being like, where does it rate on the Emissary scale? Is it even close to Emissary?
Yeah, probably so. But also, I didn't find out until after watching the episode and looking it up online that it's a 3-parter. So we've got 2 more stories to complete this arc. So I've only seen the first third of the story. So I am looking forward to finding out what else happens.
Well, see, now that's interesting. I like your initial impressions, and I see where you're coming from, because anyone who's joined us through Season 1 knows we enjoy the character development, especially this early in the show. We're still finding our way around these characters, and we want to see more of what makes them them. Whereas for a jaded old man like me, who's now on his 5th or 6th rewatch of DS9, I love that it is action-packed, that so much happens. It's incredibly attention-grabbing, especially for, you can imagine at the time, it's up against TNG, so it's still trying to find its feet, and it's like, okay, let's give people what they really want. Somebody gets shot, somebody gets punched. It's dramatic, it's attention-grabbing, it's great for that. I do also acknowledge that it doesn't leave a lot of scope for character development. What I do feel I think it does is it world builds a bit more. It reminds us of the Cardassian Bajoran situation. It reminds us who the key players are, the kind of tensions they're under. So I do think it does an okay job of that.
Yeah, I think we've always in Deep Space Nine. It does a good job of integrating that into the dialogue in a way that feels natural. Because the first episode of the new season, they've got to remind us where Bajor is, what's happened on Bajor, who the
exactly.
Cardassians are, why the Federation's, and they do it all very neatly. I think there's nobody with a huge amount of exposition apart from Lee Nallis telling his backstory, which is novel information. So yeah.
Yeah, and I actually really enjoyed that scene. We will get to it in due course. But yes, I'd like to think we've both come away liking this episode, but possibly for different reasons, which is cool, which is still cool. So, okay, so that was my point of view. So, do you want to kick us off with a bit of a scene rundown?
Absolutely. We start off on the promenade. I said it didn't have much camera work in it, but the camera pans from the promenade into the upper level of Quark's bar. There's a really nice shot of, I've put in brackets, alien with the triangular divots out of their face, because I can't remember what race they are.
Oh, yes.
The alien that's got a large trunk-like thing going out the back.
And the ridge. And we talked about how good they were the last time they were in an episode, and we've already forgotten.
Yeah, we had two of them walking down the corridor in one episode. They've not been the focus of any action yet, so I don't think we've heard them named, but they look very impressive. But I couldn't find a decent shot of them online, and I can't remember what they're called, so you're just going to have to watch it and find out what they look like.
Exactly.
The pan looks down to the lower floor where there's a game of... Oh, sorry, it's from the upper level of the promenade.
Yep.
Looks down to the lower floor where there's a game of Dabo taking place. So obviously everyone shouts Dabo just as it goes past there. It's just a really nice establishing shot of everyday life on the station. We then cut to Quark, who is stopped in his tracks by Odo shouting his name, and Quark going, "Oh no, not now, Odo." Setting up a perfect little Odo Quark scene. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'll just briefly run through what that conversation consists of. Odo insists that they talk now, reminds Quark of them discussing a Subite freighter, which Quark said was smuggling defective isolinear rods to Bajor. Odo had investigated, and it turned out that Quark was telling him the truth, which is uncanny because Quark has a lot of black market contacts, every reason to hide his contacts, and in this case, he gave him a real link to something that was going on. And Quark responds, "Really, Odo, sometimes I think there's no pleasing you. I help you crack a notorious smuggling ring, yet you still insist on treating me like an enemy." And Odo says, "You are the enemy." And Odo can't explain why he's helping him. Quark says that it's simple. He thinks that they should call a truce. Odo says he must be joking, and Quark says, "From now on, you and I are going to be friends." Odo insists that he's always up to something and wanders away. And then Quark says to Rom that he doesn't think he's ever seen Odo looking so perplexed. Rom also looks very confused because he thought that smugglers were a potential source of great profit. So Quark quotes to him, "The 76th rule of acquisition. Every once in a while declare peace. It confuses the hell out of your enemies." So I said it didn't have much character work in it. That's just a really nice reintroduction to Quark and who he is, Odo and who he is. It shows their characters developing their relationship a little bit further. It shows who Rom is, the clueless brother of Quark who works with him but can't follow Quark's thinking very well. Yeah, it's a lovely little scene to open the episode, especially since there isn't a lot of focus on those characters throughout this episode. I'm glad that they got some space here.
Exactly. I just think it's quite interesting again that DS9 has decided to open the episode with the non-Federation crew, non-Starfleet. Yeah. Odo and Quark are not part of the Starfleet crew of the station. They are, I don't know how to describe them. They're main cast members, but they're not part of Sisko's command structure, which is really interesting. So I thought it was really nice, and we love Quark's bar. We love that it looks real and believable, and the opposite of, say, 10 Forward on the Enterprise, which is very kind of really formal, especially a works canteen.
It does look like somewhere you'd have a work conference rather than go to relax. Yeah.
It is a bit awkward. So I always love shots in Quark. And just returning to the alien race we could not identify, they're sat laughing with the alien character I also can't recall, who had the bad stew in the episode Babel of season 1. And he forced stew into Quark's face. It's the same character, so...
Oh my god, that's wonderful.
It just popped right back into my mind. So
that's really nice. I like that DS9 makes a lot of use of background characters. There's lots of little conversations, or just people not being given speaking roles because then they get paid more, but just popping up on screen time. again.
Exactly.
That's a lovely observation, Tim.
Exactly. It all builds into this believable busy bar, busy port, lot of, again, not people in the same Starfleet uniforms. So it's lovely. It's already distinguishing. This isn't TNG. This is something completely different. So, no, I really like this opener. And any Quark-Odo interaction, I mean, just spectacular. I love them.
But yes, Quark then heads upstairs where he meets a tall alien woman who is wearing the shiniest trousers that I've seen on Star Trek yet. We have a picture of her. and she gives an impression. Yeah.
And that is a hell of a stance as well, to be coming up a spiral staircase and see that.
Yeah.
Well,
I think I do appreciate that. I appreciate it when in Star Trek the female characters are not sexualized, because let's face it happens a lot of the time.
Oh, God,
even if it's just uniforms that they're forced to wear, they're often extremely fitted. But yeah, this is meant to be a character who is being deliberately provocative, and she does 100%. A really good job. I can't fault her.
Yes, agreed.
But yes, Quark is. She says hello to Quark, and she asks, "How are your lobes?" Oh no, she pronounces it Quark. Quark, rather than a quark. There's no all sound. And Q says, tingling at the Q. It's because I call him Q. I always initialize the characters in my notes, and I end up calling him Q, who is already a character who isn't in this one.
I'm sorry.
Quark. Oh, Mondays, eh? Quark says that his lobes are tingling at the sight of her, which, horny Quark. And he sticks a finger in her drink, gives it a taste, and asks her if she wants another black hole. Not his finest moment.
It's very quickly reminding us that Quark is like quite a cringe-worthy character.
He's hideously lascivious, and he tends to get away with it a lot of the time. But she says she doesn't have time. Her ship's about to leave, and she asks if he knows anyone going to Bajor. She has an earring, which we also have a picture of. I think the second picture. Which she was given by a maintenance worker on Cardassia 4, and which she promised to deliver to Bajor. And she said that she was told that whoever she showed it to would understand. So Quark says that, yes, he knows what to do with it. He takes the earring, kisses her on the cheek, and walks back down the staircase. And as far as I know, that character walks out of our lives forever, though I hope she'll be back with her trousers.
I'm racking my brain.
Without her trousers, either would do.
Listen, Kat, let's keep this podcast PG as much as we can, huh?
Let's be better than Berman.
But there's time enough to get angry with Berman. I feel like she may make a return. There's something very familiar about her that this isn't the only time we've seen her.
She's a very nicely put together character, I think. The outfit is very striking.
Intriguing.
She's a good actress for the short time she's on screen. So yeah, it would be nice to have her pop up occasionally just to hand artifacts over to Quark, or to commit crimes.
That would be super cool if she was. Let's absolutely hope so. I also just wanted to quickly look at that kiss. It's affectionate, and that is not something I would ever associate with Quark.
No, she doesn't pull back from it. It's a kind of almost a French kiss on the cheek, rather than a lascivious attempt to lick her or anything.
Exactly. So it's a contrast to what we know of Quark and the preceding moments. It's very strange. I find it a little bit out of character for him, and I don't know if the impression I got was that they actually have quite a decent relationship of some description.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there's definitely an impression that he knows where the boundaries are, and he neither oversteps them nor shies away from them.
Exactly.
She doesn't look like someone who would take bullshit from someone like Quark. So we have to assume that what both of them are doing is acceptable to them both.
That was my impression as well, which was very odd, because normally, every woman who comes into contact with Quark is repulsed.
Yeah, the very next woman that he speaks to is very keen to get him to go away as soon as she can.
Exactly. So it's a wonderful contrast.
This is true.
Unique.
So you can maintain friendships with women under certain circumstances, maybe only when they're smuggling illicit goods. Who knows?
This is it. But no, do take us on to the next scene where he meets a woman who is less happy to see him.
We're in Kira's quarters, and she is standing I didn't get a picture of this, but she's standing with her arms out to the sides and her palms raised, meditating in front of a Bajoran icon with 2 candles before it. The door chimes, and she lowers her arms, says, "Come in," blows out the candles. And then Quark is standing in the doorway saying, "Surprise!" which is what nobody wants to see. first thing in the day. She asks what he wants, and he says, I always wondered what your quarters look like, because, as you say, he's got absolutely no riz. He's just slimy.
Back to Quark. Back to classic Quark as we know him.
Yeah, she says that it better not be his only reason for being here. He says, you don't entertain much, do you? She says, oh, I entertain a lot. I just don't entertain you. He starts wandering towards her bedroom, and she says, you take one step in there, and I promise it'll be your last. Quark said, it'll be worth it. But again, I think that they're establishing the relationship between the characters, that Kira barely tolerates Quark. Quark would sleep with Kira at the drop of a hat, given the opportunity to.
100%.
And it gets that across very effectively. So Kira says, you've got 5 seconds to tell me what you want. Quark eventually shows her the earring, but only after she started physically pushing him out of the door. She recognizes it immediately and asks him where he got it. He says, why is it valuable? And he explains that it's from a Boslik freighter captain. She got it from a Cardassian. Kira asks where, and Q said on Cardassia 4. That's what she told me anyway. Kira just takes the earring and walks off without a word. And Quark grumpily calls after, consider it a gift. And then I think these just left in her quarters. She doesn't make sure he leaves, which I think was unwise of her, but nothing comes of it.
Thankfully, yeah. Very unusual, but I think it's intended to drive home how important this is. That this artifact is so important that Kira needs to immediately act on it.
Yes, definitely.
And I'm just showing that picture again of the earring, in which we can also admire Quark's wonderful nail varnish, which is expertly applied and quite an interesting hue.
Damn, it is. Yes.
So I
wonder if he wears it between episodes or if they reapply it every day.
Who knows?
I can't imagine it's ever chipped. But yes. We then get the opening credits, so imagine yourself flying around the station a few times, and then imagine a few more times, then imagine a few more times again. They haven't shown it all between seasons. The next shot, where on the lower promenade, shot from above, Sisko is walking towards us, and Jake runs into shot on the upper level saying, hey, Dad, wait up! Sisko smiles up at him and waves, and Jake comes down from the spiral staircase and says, you got a minute? Sisko says, for you, absolutely. And they walk away together. And they have a short conversation in which they mention baseball at one point, which is an ongoing theme for these two characters. Jake says that he's got some good news, and Sisko replies, you learned how to hit Bob Gibson's fastball, which apparently in the original script was Sandy Koufax's curveball. I don't know anything about baseball, so I don't know. I don't know what the difference is between these two. I got the impression from a brief look at Wikipedia that Sandy Koufax did not have a very established or esteemed career otherwise. He had one instance of a curveball being very successful, and I think that was about it. Any baseball fans in the chat might tell us different. We're in the UK. We don't get it. Sports.
Yeah.
But Jake says no, even better. And Sisko replies, better than hitting Gibson's fastball? This I want to hear. So Jake explains that the Bajoran girl, and Sisko says the one with the beautiful smile, it's really nice establishing that these characters do talk about their lives together. This isn't entirely new news to Sisko. Jake says, that's right, Lyra, I've decided to ask her out. So Sisko starts doing it. There's a bit of, I think, I think it's at the wrong time, but kind of boomer millennial sort of relationship, the older generation desperate to impart wisdom on the younger generation, and the younger generation going, you don't have a clue about this, do you?
Yeah,
but it's a nicely observed instance of it, I think.
It's sweet. It's Ben and Jake being a father-son relationship, which we always enjoy seeing. And it's touching. They aren't sitcom, butting heads, adversarial, like it will be very easy to write. They actually have a close, touching relationship. And this is a nice moment in it, I felt.
Yes, it's really nice that Jake has come to his dad when he's going to go out with the girl. And he does want some advice on something. Jake says he's already asked her out. And he wants suggestions on what they could do, because he was thinking of taking her to the holosuites, which in most Star Treks would be a very innocent suggestion. So they very early get in the holosuites are for sex, and no, Jake, you are not getting there. Sisko just slaps it down and says, holosuites? I don't think so.
That was my immediate reaction. We've established on this podcast and in previous episodes, the holosuites are straight up for fucking, and no way, I think Jake's 14, 15 here. Absolutely, under no circumstances would you want that. So no, we're all 100% with Ben when he goes, no way. he is a reasonable authority figure.
He knows what's sensible. So Cisco says, you're too young to take a girl to the holosuites. Jake says, well, how about to take her to our quarters? And Cisco says, oh, no quarters. And Jake says, well, we're really going to talk. Cisco says, talk in public. It's not the same.
No.
Well, I like it. It's a very economical and effective way of getting across that bit of tension between two characters who are clearly nonetheless very fond of each other.
Yes.
So Cisco suggests that they go upstairs and watch the ships go through the wormhole. And Jake said, that's boring. Cisco says, since when? And Jake says, since I started going out with girls. Cisco points out, this is your first date. And Jake comes back with a great one-liner. I don't want it to be my last.
Loved it. It's so sharp and fast, the dialogue. I love it. It feels natural but clever.
Yes, and neither character comes away as looking especially foolish or
unreasonable.
Neither has a lot of authority or power over the other. Jake isn't 100%. No, Dad, I'm not listening to what you say. He's come to him for advice, but when he gives him advice that he doesn't want to hear, he tells him so. It is just a really nicely observed relationship between a parent and a child. It feels both real and good. I think it is set up to be an instance of a very positive and healthy relationship between the two, even when there's conflict.
Absolutely. No, I love it.
So yeah, Kira arrives on the scene and says she needs to speak to Cisco. He says, one moment, Major, which is lovely. Even though he can see that it's important, this is one of his crew. He wants to finish the conversation with his son first. And Jake responds, I can see you're not ready to have this conversation yet, which again I absolutely loved. Because it's just a nice reversal of what was I expect.
I immediately thought that as well. He immediately takes charge and is like, this is my way out, and I'm gonna usurp your position a bit and say, we're not ready to have this conversation. And it works. Ben is absolutely dumbfounded.
He is. Yeah. Jake wanders away saying, I'll have to come up with a few ideas on my own. Really, don't worry about it. And as he's walking away, Cisco calls, who's worried? Which he clearly is.
Yeah, understandably.
But yes, we then move on and Kira reminds a commander and they walk together to the table section of the promenade near the replicator. The replimat, I think.
That's what it's called.
Sure. Is that the section of the ship where the replicator is?
Yes, that whole little platform with the little tables.
Yeah,
it's like a little cafe, and they do call it.
It's like a laundromat, replimat.
Bingo.
It's where the replicator sits. Got it.
So if you don't want to eat at Quark's because you don't want to get involved in any of the shenanigans that happen there, or you don't want to have a beer at 10 a.m., you can go to the replimat, and it's where you have a less, bar feed experience
and a less interaction-y experience if you just want to poke buttons on a replicator.
Precisely.
So yes, quite nicely. I think it's in this scene that there are some flowers on the table in the replimat. Yes. It's the same flowers that are there when Garak and Bashir have their first conversation.
Oh wow!
Which I really like. I assume that there's a florist who serves the DS9 real filming crew, and they've got the same irises on the tables, which is nice and consistent. I think they've probably decided that it looks like a space-esque flower could potentially be a joke. So they use those frequently. They go to the tables and Kira doesn't order anything. Cisco orders one Ractogino with Jacarine peel. I have no idea whether it's just his accent that pronounces it Jacarine or whether anyone would, or whether it's a Jacarine like a tangerine. I don't know, but he orders it, and he orders it with flair. He does a little thing with his hand.
Yes, I love that. Absolutely. It's sweet. It's natural. It makes you actually believe in this character. He has these little peccadillos, probably even unconsciously doing them without realizing it. It's so sweet. I love it.
It's really nice. And again, for anyone who's tuning in for the first time, it distinguishes him very clearly from Captain Picard, who just barks, tea, Earl Grey, hot, whenever he wants a drink. He's just no flair, no little hand gestures. Even though he's French, there's no kind of about him. He's just,
that's true.
Upper class English. But yes, the Ractogino appears with a nice little teleporter effect. Cisco also orders one Icoberry tart. So he's sitting there with a nice fancy coffee and a piece of cake while he's got no idea what Kira is desperate to tell him about. She tells him that she needs to borrow a runabout. He asks what for. And she says to him that he doesn't want to ask her that. He says it's too late. He can't loan her a Starfleet runabout without knowing where she plans on taking it, which is reasonable. It establishes that he does have authority over her. He's the one who has to give her permission for this. He's willing to hear her out. He isn't saying an outright no. But yeah, I think we get the impression in this conversation that she that Kira is working to her own motives. Her
Yeah.
motives are Bajoran to Bajor.
Yeah.
She has to get Federation permission to do anything, which is a pain in the butt. And yeah, she has to persuade Sisko around on this. So she tells him she wants to take it to Cardassia 4 to rescue a Bajoran prisoner of war. And he whistles, leans back in his chair and says, "You're right, I wish you hadn't told me." She shows him the earring, which has the insignia of Lee Nallas. Sisko recognizes the name, though he doesn't recognize the earring. And he says, "The resistance leader." And Kira says, "The greatest we ever had, his victory over Golda Rail in hand-to-hand combat." And he interrupts her, "Major, I've already heard the story. Wasn't he reported killed in action?" Which is, again, a really nice, neat way of saying that everyone in this world knows of this person. He is a celebrity. He is known of. The story is a famous one. He doesn't need to hear it again, so we're not going to get to hear it. Because you wouldn't sit through it.
Exactly. We don't need that exposition dump. We have just information to go, okay, this person is worth risking a lot for without learning a lot of his background, which we will learn in pieces throughout the episode. So it's not just one massive thump at the beginning of the episode, which I think some Star Treks have suffered from in the past.
Yeah, I think this episode does a very good job of just drip feeding the plot as we go. In a nice organic way. I love Deep Space Nine. But yes, Kira says that his body was never found. She explains that Bajoran ships just don't have the maneuverability or the defensive capabilities to get her safely in and out of Cardassian territory. And I really like that. The writers have already headed off complaints that Bajor has an interest in retrieving him, so it makes sense for them to give her a vehicle. There's a scientific reason why she wouldn't use it. The vehicles do not maneuver as well. And I think it makes in-world sense in that Bajor has presumably suffered a lot of scientific advancement during the occupation, which would have a knock-on effect on what they were able to design and produce in the time following. So although it doesn't say that in the episode, and it's not necessarily implied, I think it fits in world. It makes sense that a Bajoran ship wouldn't be equipped with the same kind of technology that a cutting-edge Federation ship would.
Precisely.
Sisko puts out his hand. She gives him the earring. He has a look at it and asks if it's genuine. And Kira says that Dax has found dermal residue on the backing. A genetic analysis matched it to Lee's DNA records, which is a smart use of available tech. I'm a little bit sad that we didn't get the Dax scene of her doing that, just because I miss Dax, and she doesn't do a lot in this episode.
No. I feel, actually, this is a good point to point out that I think a fair bit was cut out of this episode. You can occasionally see... I just get the feeling there are certain scenes where they reference something or they have information, or it feels like they had to take an axe to this episode and there are big chunks missing because it runs very quickly. It's quite taut. The action, happens really swiftly. So I do feel that scenes like that would have been wonderful, but I feel they were just squeezed out on the editing table, which is a shame because that would have been brilliant.
I think they did still strike a good balance of having those little character moments near the start of the episode, and a little bit more talk later on. So I think they've done a good job of squeezing the necessary bits of story into the dialogue where necessary, rather than having to show us every stage of the process.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I like the extent to which the writers have thought about the different aspects of it. They're trying to fill in plot holes before the fans can see them.
That's the best way.
Probably heard more than enough of that from the PNG audiences. So yeah, they're thinking, right, what would you need to prove that this was his? Right, we're doing it. It happened in the background. It's fine. Kira has also contacted 3 ministers on Bajor. She's been very busy. And she said their response was exactly what she expected. Sisko replies, "In other words, they're unwilling to risk going to war with Cardassia over an earring. I can't say I blame them." And Kira responds, "Commander, you and I both know the provisional government is made up of political opportunists too busy fighting among themselves to care what happens to Bajor," which is really cutting from Major Kira. I'm not sure she's ever been quite so scathing about the provisional government before this one.
No, I mean, it was in that very first scene in Emissary. Her very first scene is her arguing with a government official, possibly a minister, and then saying, you should be doing more, and they're like, "Kira, this is out of your hands now. You can't do anything." She's like, "Well, you're an idiot," and then hangs up on them. So it does continue a theme that's been rumbling in the background that the government is a bit ramshackle, and is starting to fall apart. And, it continues that theme that after the loss of Kayapaka, there's no unifying force in Bajoran politics. So I like that this continues that theme. It says, beyond just us running into a monster of the week, a disaster of the week, there was an ongoing problem here, a backdrop that is Sisko's wider mission, and we hear about this later on, which is to work with Bajor to hopefully induct them into the Federation. But he can't if they're falling apart at the seams. So it's a nice little don't forget. All around us is this chaos. So I really like that bit.
Yes. And yes,
Sorry.
Sorry.
Keep taking
Sorry,
us
I
out
was
of it.
sorry, I was caught up in your enthusiasm about Kira and her wranglings with the government. But yes, Kira continues that since the loss of the Kai, again,
There we go.
nice, neat bit of information giving, the situation's only gone from bad to worse. There are reports of factional fighting in half a dozen districts. Religious riots have spread throughout the Southern Islands. Bajor needs a leader, someone the people will listen to, someone they can trust. And it's a compelling argument. It's not primarily about saving the life of one man from servitude. It's about the future of Bajor. It's a really compelling reason to kidnap him, to rescue him from, liberate him, the opposite. I apologize. So yeah, I think it makes sense that this is everything that she says to Sisko. She trusts him with that information, and it would make his life easier as well if they were to bring Lenalis back to Bajor. And
it's very Trek as well, isn't it? The needs of the many are outweighing the needs of just us or Lee to be rescued or anything. It's about the future of Bajor. It's about a much bigger situation. So it's wonderfully Trek, I feel.
Yes, you're right. It's very philosophically in keeping with what Trek characters are willing to do. They will go on the dangerous mission, partly because it makes a good story, but mostly for the future, for everybody. So Sisko asks if she thinks that Lenalis is that leader, and Kira says that I know he is. O'Brien then calls Sisko, asking him and Odo to join him in the Habitat Ring, level 13, section 4. And I love that it's called the Habitat Ring. It makes it sound like it was built for hamsters. Or they could have called it living quarters. They could have called it accommodation, but no, it's the Habitat Ring.
It's cute, and it is a little bit futuristic-y sounding, you know. Yeah, it's a space station, you know, the Habitat module, the Habitat Ring. And I think if you think about the way Deep Space Nine is made, the bigger ring with the larger pylons, I believe they call the docking ring. It is the inner ring that is, thank you very much, Kat. That inner ring nearest the core is the Habitat Ring, and then there is the central core in the middle, which has ops and the promenade and the reactors at the bottom. So
yeah, which makes a lot of security sense in terms of if anything we're going to attack the station, they hit the docks first, arguably the most expendable bit. The people who are in charge of keeping everything running are right in the middle of it.
Yes, it does. Yeah. It makes an odd sense, doesn't it? In a way that I'm just going to quickly harp on a problem I always have that people have pointed out before, that Federation starships do not follow this. And actually a lot of Star Trek ships don't, because the bridge of any Starfleet ship is this little bubble right on the very top that you could very easily just pop with a phaser. Klingon ships, you know, they have that head on a long neck, which you could just...
you can snap off.
You could snap. A Romulan warbird has that great big head. It's not as if
they were actually looking at a view through plexiglass. It's all it's an electric screen.
They don't need to be there. They don't need to be there. It's astonishing. And yes, exactly. Thank you, the indoor cat. It's not practically sound at all. And I appreciate, you know, Star Trek is an idealistic future where, you know, we won't need to worry about being in fights and things like that because ours is a utopia of peace. But that's not actually what the show is. The show is about danger. So it would make sense, as they do with my own knowledge of modern warships, that normally a ship it's controlled from the heart, the very heart. A modern warship's combat information center, its bridge, is usually in the heart of the ship, the deepest, most well-protected area. The Kardashians got it. You know, it's at the very middle of the station, but everyone else seems to have missed that. So,
maybe this is why the Cardassians have been such a powerful colonizing force, while the Federation have to keep running around saving everyone else from these powerful colonizing forces.
Interesting. Intergalactic architecture as a representation of politics. Who knows? But that's enough.
Amazing. There's a PhD in that.
Oh, good God, how niche. But yes, there we go. I'm sorry, I've completely segued us, as we always do. New viewers of the podcast should be aware that we tend to segue very easily. Sorry about that.
Yeah, we enjoy having a good ramble.
Thank you, Kat. But
I am about to segue us again, though, just because
please.
I decided to put this ramble in here rather than anywhere else in the episode. I found it really striking that Lenalis' earring plays a really large role in this episode. The earring being an object that is hugely recognisable to all Bajorans and that it's unquestionably his. We haven't had any law so far about the Bajoran earring, except that in The Next Generation, Lieutenant Ro Laren fought to be allowed to wear hers as an important part of the culture and faith. And it was initially dismissed by Picard as a piece of jewellery. By the end of the episode, she was allowed to wear it because the Federation are not evil, they're just a bit misguided sometimes. But otherwise, in Deep Space Nine, we've seen that every Bajoran wears an earring on their right ear, connected from the upper to the lower, usually with chains between them. But I don't know anything yet about at what point in their life they acquire them, whether it's a rite of passage thing, who makes them, whether every single Bajoran has a unique earring, which this suggests. If Lee Nallas had an earring that was, and it's recognisably his, even though to me it looks like yet another silver earring that's the same shape and design.
Well, it's
very clearly his.
Yeah, we've been given no context to indicate that it is anything different. I mean, if you were to show me Rose's earring and Kira's earring, I couldn't probably even tell them apart. So that's a really good point. The show has given us no reason to think otherwise. And they even slot in that line about how, the earring actually has DNA from Lee, so we know it's his. But also, Kira says the insignia is Lee's. This is Lee's earring. And how do you know this?
It was immediately recognisable out of however many Bajorans she's ever met. This one is very significant. So how do they distinguish that? Is it that when he was believed to have gained so many victories, he was given a special earring? Or is every single one of them just so unique and much like a human face, much like a Bajoran face? If you know it, it means something to you. And if you don't, it's just another one.
That is an excellent question, and I do not feel we're going to get a satisfactory answer.
We've got a lot of episodes yet to go in which we might learn a bit more about Bajoran culture around the earring specifically.
Here's hoping.
I guess that's something I would hope to have more of, because they could be specific to families. They could have designs that relate to the family profession. I don't know, and there's so much potential there.
Really good point.
But yes. The next scene happens in the Habitat Ring corridor. Odo, Sisko, and O'Brien. O'Brien says that he was on the way to the Crossover Bridge 3 to do some repair work on the field modulators when he noticed this, which we've got a picture of, the fourth picture.
Go.
And the minor keystring sting tells us that the graffito he's showing Sisko is a bad thing. And he says, this is the emblem for the Alliance of Global Unity. They call themselves the Circle. O'Brien asks what gives them the right to mess up our station. He's mostly concerned that there's a piece of graffiti on his special, nice, clean station. And Odo explains that they're an extremist faction who believe in Bajor for the Bajorans. All other species are inferior and should be expelled from the planet. And to me, this feels very real. I think the gentle-sounding but potentially fascist name of the organisation, the Alliance for Global Unity. What's wrong with unity? And I think the idea of some parts of a formerly oppressed society seeking to oppress others with one veer too far into real-world stuff, but we talked before about the aftermath of World War I. And how that led to the rise of the Third Reich. It feels like a very realistic thing to happen, that fascist organisations arise within an embattled society.
Absolutely. And to have, yes, as you say, such a euphemistic name, which sounds so positive on its surface. And it is interesting to note that it almost never gets referenced again. It's always after this, it's the Circle. That's how they are referred to.
Which does sound more sinister. It sounds more, it's a shorter and more evil sounding term than the Alliance for Global Unity.
Much like the Democratic People's Republic, one of those innocuous sounding, contradictory titles for certain countries which are neither democratic nor for the people. And yet that is their formal title. A cynic might observe those similarities as well.
So yes, so I appreciated the simpleness of the symbol, the usefulness of it. It's a nice little bit of world building. Sisko says he understands that this emblem has been appearing all over Bajor. Odo says that's right, but this is the first time I've seen it here, which again is a nice way of cueing us into the fact that these characters keep track of what happens on Bajor. They're both very aware of what goes on there. O'Brien says if they think scrolling a couple of signs is going to send us packing, they've got another thing coming. And Cisco points out that right now they're just trying to show us that we're vulnerable, i.e. that someone has managed to sneak aboard the station and draw this thing without being noticed or caught. Odo points out that this section is a very low security area, and Cisco replies that as of now, Constable, there are no low security areas on this station. Which I was curious that since the events of In the Hands of the Prophets, when there was a terrorist attack on a school and the attempted assassination of a Bajoran religious figure, security have just carried on as normal. There's no extra measures taken, even though the person that they know committed the assassination, or rather commanded the assassination, is still at large. But no, someone can wander aboard the station and start scrolling fascist graffiti and not run into any trouble. So it's the wake-up call that they needed. Yeah.
That is a really good point, and that had not occurred to me, but you're absolutely right.
Then again, it happened. The episode was written long before 9/11 took place. The writers hadn't lived in a world where a terrorist attack had been met by very, very tight clamping down of security in many areas of life. So it could just be that my point of view on this is a post 9/11, you can't carry anything larger than however many milliliters of liquid onto a plane anymore. Whereas for them, they hadn't encountered that. It was a one-off incident. The school had been destroyed and they all went on with their lives.
I think, you
I think it probably would have been written differently were it written now.
100%. Also, you could say that, the Federation is still trying to, export its utopian views, which is, look, this is a horrible thing that's happened, but life must go on as normal in our free market utopia, where we light touch government, everything's fine, So you contrast that with a very reactionary, neoconservative government like the United States immediately during and post 9/11. So there is that as well. And also, we've got to remember as well that these are basically Trek writers who are probably still sort of used to bottle episodes, that things don't naturally influence further episodes.
That's a very good point, yes.
They're trying to break out of it. But this feels like an unconscious reversion of, we should probably actually have thought that the last series, which presumably was not that long in universe, it was not that long before this happened, that wouldn't actually have been a terrifying wake-up moment, and we should absolutely react accordingly and increase security and all of that.
Because I was just thinking it might have been about not having to cram too much explanatory information into the first episode.
That's a very good point.
They could quite neatly have said, well, we've had security increased since the assassination attempt.
It would have been a line. It would have been one line. Yeah.
But no, I think they just wanted something to happen, which would mean that tension is ramping up on the station. Things are starting to feel more dangerous from now than they were previously, regardless of the fact that someone almost got murdered aboard the station a short while ago.
Yes. As the Indoor Cat points out in chat, it is easy to do graffiti, and DS9, we must forget as well, is about 4 or 5 times the size of the Enterprise D, which is itself a very big ship. And as far as we've seen, there's Odo and about 10 people who seem to do security for the whole station. So
this is fair.
I can appreciate it is difficult.
But yeah, there is also, though, that it's a future where there aren't many cameras. I come later in this episode to the fact that there aren't any journalists around, and we don't have security cameras aboard the station as far as I'm aware. No, we do have security footage, but not everywhere, not ubiquitously, not every corner. It feels...
That's absolutely right.
I think modern life has more security cameras in it than Deep Space Nine anticipated it would.
Especially where Kat and I live, which I believe the UK still holds the record for the most country with the most CCTV cameras per head in the world, which is a terrifying concept.
That's nice that it rose in the country where Orwell lived and wrote.
Right.
But yes, but it does feel like a bit of an anomaly that they don't just have a security camera on the opposite wall that picks up a hooded figure who scrawled this and then ran away. There's just no way of knowing who did it. Nobody saw them to all intents and purposes. But yes, let's move on from these grim thoughts.
Indeed.
yes, the three characters then fade to black, and we cut to Cisco's office where he is throwing a baseball between his hands. I've written as if it's hot rather than with a firm grasp. It's more kind of contact juggling with the thing rather than.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah. Jadzia arrives and asks if this is going to be about baseball. Cisco says, not this time. And Jadzia replies, good. Cisco thought that she enjoyed talking about baseball. And she says, Curzon enjoyed it, but not half as much as he led you to believe. Which is, again, a really nice little bit of character work. It feels believable for these two characters, and it introduces the fact that Jadzia used to be, to all intents and purposes, a different person.
Yes.
So Cisco is concerned. Cisco says he's concerned about their mission. He sees everything they've fought for over the last year starting to unravel. Jadzia said that she told him it was going to be a tough assignment when they came here, although she hadn't realised it would be this tough. Cisco asks, what if I told you I knew someone who could bring stability to Bajor, someone who could unite the factions and give us a chance to do our job? And my first thought was, what about Vedek Bareil? What about the guy who nearly got assassinated in the last episode? What about that guy who was going to, become the next Win and bring stability to Bajor? They don't want to go over that episode again right here. I think because they've got more planned for Opaka, for
Win.
For Win. Win
Yes.
rather than Bareil. I'm already getting them mixed up. They've got plans for Win later in this season, I think. So they don't want to start hashing over Bareil and how the religious and political elements of Bajoran society interact. So we just don't get a mention of him. It's somebody else now. But Jadzia responds that she'd give Kira the runabout, and she doesn't say how she knows. Cisco wants to know what he should say to the Cardassians if Kira does save Lunalis, and Jadzia says the question is, what did they say to us? They swore they released all their Bajoran prisoners, which is a really bloody good point. They're still holding prisoners of war long after the war has ended. So yes, the fault lies very much with them, and if they are rescued, yeah, they ain't got a leg to stand on. Cisco nods, Jadzia leaves. Cisco puts down his baseball on the coffee table in front of him and stares at it with his hands on his cheeks. Which is nice. It shows that he's genuinely struggling with this. He's not going to make a snap decision based on his seniority. He really wants to make the right one.
Absolutely.
We then get a shot in Ops. Wordlessly, Jadzia approaches Kira, who's watching her in anticipation, and Jadzia takes Kira's upper arm in her hand and gives her what the script calls her "I gave it my best shot" glance, which I think I didn't quite pick up. I thought it was just a smile shared between them. It looked quite hopeful, but it was meant to be a I tried.
Oh wow, yeah, no, well, I saw that and I really liked it. It just looked like actually a nice bit of physical affection, between two characters who I've said before. I like that they are developing a friendship between these two characters. There's not been
test finally for
right.
Star Trek.
Come on,
Actually, to be fair, other than Troy and Crusher, who do occasionally have scenes where they discuss other characters.
Exactly, and it was there, and it could have been so much more. Those are two great characters who were criminally underused. So I like that they are building on it, and I love to see it. That yes, these two female characters are starting to build a unique relationship separate from all these men.
Yeah,
and I liked it. It was like an affectionate. I know this is important to you, and I am in your corner. I am going for it with you. So I really liked it, and it was wordless as well, which to me spoke volumes. The less you say, the more I will infer from that situation. So I really liked it.
Definitely. I think it puts a lot of trust in the actors when you know that they can exchange a glance and that will carry to the camera exactly what you want it to. Yeah, so this is a really lovely moment. But yes, Cisco then leaves his office and nods at Kira, who smiles back at him. And he says, Chief, Major Kira needs a runabout. So O'Brien replies, oh, so she's going to Cardassia 4 after all. To which Cisco reasonably asks, is there anyone on the station she didn't tell? And O'Brien says, I doubt she mentioned it to Quark. And I really like that. I just love the fact that she's gone off and told absolutely everybody her business.
I must do this. It's so important.
That's just it. It is urgent her. She doesn't care who knows, and she doesn't consider any of them a security risk, I think.
No, and in effort, actually, she's right, because they are all immediately proved that they can help. Jadzia goes into the office to bat for her, and the chief is about to come up with 100 ways he can help disguise the runabout. It's good. It's good crew unity. You love to see
lovely.
it.
And I think in this first episode of the new series, it demonstrates that although Kira is Bajoran and has her own interests, the crew are behind her in this. They are a close-knit team. She trusts them and vice versa. It's really nicely achieved. So Cisco then says, as far as Quark's concerned, she's going to Lamenda Prime to bring back mineral samples. He looks frustrated because obviously everyone else is only meant to know about the cover story and all of them know where she's really going. He asks if there's any way that they can prevent Cardassian sensors from picking up the runabout signature. O'Brien suggests that he could modulate the engine's power emissions, reconfigure the deflect shield grid, and install field buffers around the subspace emitter coil. They just shoved in as many of the current key phrases as they could.
Sorry, Chief. You get all the technical Trek no babble words.
But he says that by the time he's done, the Cardassians will think they're picking up a Lysepian transport. Cisco knows that O'Brien's already given this a bit of thought, and O'Brien says, well, I suppose I have. Which he was talking about this some time ago, and he's been dwelling on it.
Love it.
But yeah, the next scene is Kira in her quarters. She's wearing what the script calls civilian clothes, which is another very tightly fitted outfit. Thank you very much, Berman. But she has got quite a nice crocheted top on over the
so
tightly fitted suit thing.
In my notes, I've got a laughably implausible cardigan. Because it's just like this very heavily, crocheted, they're quite thick fibres, but big spaces in between them. So I don't really know. It's not going to keep you warm. It's not going to keep you dry. It's quite short.
It's probably more style than function.
I guess. Absolutely.
It doesn't fall off while she's wearing it.
Which we should give bloody thanks to, considering it's Berman. So it could have been a lot more provocative. So thankfully.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
But yes, the doorbell chimes. Kira says, come in, and the door opens for Cisco and O'Brien, who is wearing much looser civilian clothes, because he's a dude. Yes. Yes, Cisco says, to tell you that Chief O'Brien will be accompanying you on your mission. Kira says that I don't think that's a good idea. Having a Federation officer along could cause complications for you later, but Cisco says he's willing to risk that. Sorry, Tim?
I was going to say that I think that is actually a legitimate concern. Kira is a Bajoran national, in this murky kind of post-occupation world with Cardassia. Fair enough. But a serving Federation officer on a Federation ship, basically pulling off what is essentially an act of espionage. It is straight up spycraft. It's a massive deal. I'm not surprised at all that Kira immediately comes up with what to me is a very legitimate complaint. You're asking me to take a national from your government to whom we don't have a full relationship, and you are currently at peace with Cardassia, and if you seem to be abetting me, you will get dragged into this. So it's a very bold move by Cisco. I can see why he does it, but it's a serious move.
It is, and it also occurs to me that in the midst of this, no one has. They pointed out that what Cardassia has done is illegal.
Yep.
No one has suggested that they approach Cardassia with this information and say,
that's a really good point.
But I think that speaks to how untrustworthy Cardassia is.
They just deny it,
they could have thrown, exactly. They could throw in a line saying they deny it. They would probably murder him rather than hand him over.
That's a very good point. Actually,
it isn't mentioned, but
there we
you
go.
can kind of hand it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Cisco says that he's willing to take the risk of sending O'Brien, that the Major is an excellent pilot, but Mr. O'Brien here is better, and he wants to make sure that he gets his runabout back in one piece, which is a really sweet way of saying that he wants Kira to get home safely.
Yes, it is. It's interesting as well. I never would have thought that the Chief was a good pilot. We know he's got experience of the Cardassian War. We saw it in The Wounded in TNG, that he served on the front lines of the last Federation Cardassian War. And a lot has been talked about how he is a veteran and he has some very unresolved tensions with regards to the Cardassians. And he has some, amazing TNG episodes where he has to confront that. But this is interesting to hear that he's actually also supposedly a really good pilot. So I never knew that about the Chief.
We've seen him flying the shuttle a few times, which doesn't necessitate being a brilliant pilot to fly a shuttle from planet surface to station. But they needed a member of the cast who could be a very good pilot when they needed one, and it turns out to be O'Brien.
Fine. Yep, absolutely.
Which, in terms of mixing up the cast as well, putting characters together who might not have spent that much time, I can remember that O'Brien has had good time with Bashir. He spent time with Jadzia before now. I'm not sure he spent that much time with the Major, so it might be an opportunity to try that format and see whether they work well together.
100%. Yeah, and I think it does.
Oh, definitely. I love the scenes with them. Yeah, O'Brien, Kira is resistant, saying that this is a Bajoran problem. Sisko disagrees, saying that he needs Lee Nallas back on Bajor as much as she does. O'Brien chips in that he's seen how Cardassians treat their prisoners, and no one should have to suffer like that. So yes, they bring in a good reason why O'Brien would want to get involved in this, as well as pointing out the fact of his having fought Cardassians before.
Exactly.
Kira says if the Cardassians get their hands on us, we'll be the ones suffering, and O'Brien says they'll have to catch us first. Kira concedes that she supposes she could do with the company and smiles at them both. And I really like the way that the scene plays out. It doesn't feel like Sisko is wielding an iron fist and insisting Kira do it his way. She's genuinely persuaded by his and O'Brien's appeals, and it does feel as if they're genuinely helping. They're not keeping it distrustful. I know they don't think she's going to get Lee Nallas back and then disappear or anything. Their goals are aligned in this. They genuinely need to help.
To me as well, it felt like the chief actually won Kira over by, having the right mindset going in, which is, we're not going to get caught. I am confident. I'm going to help you resolve this mission satisfactorily. And she is like, okay, in that way that presumably freedom fighters must be, I need to know I can rely on you in a pinch. And that comes up later in the episode that she, needs that reassurance that O'Brien is in 100% with her. And it works. It really works. And this is just the first part of it. I really enjoy
Nicely
that.
observed. Yeah. Next scene is in the runabout. Kira and O'Brien enter the cockpit. Kira says, "You've got the controls, Chief," and that there's one thing they need to clear up between them. She says the mission can end only one of two ways. Either we bring back Lee Nallas or we don't come back at all. O'Brien just says, "Understood." And she smiles slightly. She glances at him, which is just nice. They're both in this. They both know exactly what they're doing here. He's not going to want to pull out if things start going a bit wrong.
And it also just heightens the tension a bit more. It's like, oh, wow, this is literally make or break. They're going and they're coming back or they're not coming back at all. So it tells us how serious it is, which I liked as well.
We then get a shot of the exterior of the shuttle taking off from Deep Space Nine. We then fade to black and lights up on the shuttle heading into space. 30 minutes to Cardassia 4 by O'Brien's estimation. Kira says, hold on, we're being scanned. They are then hailed by a navigational control post. And apparently they're just on the edge. I think O'Brien notes that they're on the edge of their scanner range, which puts them out of visual contact. They can speak to them, but the Cardassians cannot see them. So he says, I suggest we try and bluff them. It's Cardassian Navigational Control Post 4, and it asks them to identify yourself. Kira responds, this is the Lysapian transport Martuk. So they've stuck with it's going to look like a Lysapian transport from the signature. The control post says that according to our scan, your space field emitters appear to be malfunctioning, which is really nice. It's because of the modifications that O'Brien has made. Everything just neatly sits together. It works really well. It doesn't read like a normal ship would because they've adapted it. They're pretending to be Lysapian. It doesn't actually look like one 100%. Kira says, we're having problems with our phase modulators. We're attempting to correct the problem. And the outpost annoyingly helpfully offers assistance so we can dispatch a repair ship. It's like, these are Cardassians and they're offering help, and the one time you really do not want them to.
It's a wonderful way of just weirdly cranking up the tension. You're like, oh no, we could be busted here for the worst possible reason.
Which I know O'Brien kind of reinforces about that by saying they want to help us, which I felt was a little bit unnecessary at that point. I think we've got the idea. But Kira says, your offer is most appreciated, post 24, but unnecessary. And the outpost says, are you certain your power signature's still fluctuating? Kira says he's getting suspicious. So Kira says to the outpost that I believe we can correct the problem on our own. Besides, Gulmarane is waiting on Cardassia 4 to receive my shipment of roulotte seeds. Any delay could ruin the entire crop, not to mention the Gull's mood. And the outpost responds, understood, you can put in for repairs after you deliver your cargo. She says, my plan exactly, and the transmission ends. After which O'Brien says, tell me, Major, who is Gulmarane? Kira says, don't ask me, I just made him up. Which I think some of it's a little bit heavy on the exposition. I think we could have done that a bit more subtly. We knew she was making it up on the fly. But it again, it kind of reinforces what Cardassian society is like, that the outpost immediately knows that if the Gull gets in a bad mood, that's trouble for everybody, and they don't want that to happen.
Exactly. It is a helpful reminder that you're dealing with a very authoritarian people where power is both great and often abused. It's daunting. I also got shades of Undiscovered Country when the Enterprise is racing to Rora Penthe to try and rescue McCoy and Kirk, and the Klingon traffic post also detects the Enterprise and is like, "What ship is that?" And they have to bluff and say, "We are, this transport ship going to Rora Penthe with supplies," and they have to bluff it out. So I did think that was a very, very slight reference for the very hardcore sad fans.
Oh, nice. Well spotted.
I don't know about that now. I'm feeling a bit too intense into it. But it's good sequence.
Yeah, it's just, given that the only Star Trek that I've seen it very, very quickly in the last 2 years. Exactly. So it's good having someone who knows it a bit more in depth to be able to highlight those moments where it's harking back to an older one.
That's very kind. So yes, and they get away with it, and they get into orbit above what I have as the Hutep Labour Camp, and
that's right. Yes.
Don't believe we've heard the name of the camp any other time, which again makes me think a scene somewhere else has been cut, and
possibly
because they also then never mention that name again. It's only this one time that O'Brien says.
I also don't know whether it's just them wanting to not overload us with new words, new names. That we know it's Cardassia 4, and that's the most important thing. But it does make sense that a Labour camp would have its own name. We wouldn't refer to any German camp as camp number X. It would be. So yeah, I think it makes sense that it has a name of its own, but we don't need to hear it lots of times.
Absolutely.
So yes, O'Brien says we're in synchronous orbit above the Hutep Labour camp. He's limited bioscans to detect only Bajoran life forms, then a pause and a beeping noise. He says, hold on, we're getting multiple readings. There must be about a dozen Bajoran prisoners down there. So we're to understand that the labour camp itself is legitimate and presumably part of Cardassia's normal penal system, but the Bajoran prisoners should not be there because the war ended. So it's not the existence of the camp itself that is a problem, it's the fact that they're still harbouring Bajorans after the occupation has ended.
100%, I think that's the right read, yeah.
Kira asks if there's any way of beaming up more than 2 at a time, and helpfully for the plot, no, there is not. And they're concerned that unless Lee Nallis were one of the first 2 that they beamed up, everything would be locked down. As soon as 2 people disappear, all of the guards are on alert. All the high security goes up. So it's a good plot reason not to be able to just beam everyone aboard and not get down to the planet's surface. So Kira says we're going to have to land. It's our only chance of getting them all out of here. And yeah, I think at the moment when she said that there was no way of guaranteeing that Lee would be one of the first 2, I felt that she was being a bit dismissive of the lives of the others. It wasn't, we need to save as many of them as we can. It feels like we need to get Lee Nallis out of there. And if he isn't one of the first 2, then we failed, which they would have. But later in the scene, she does go on to demonstrate that she very much cares about the life of every Bajoran on there. It's just that one moment when I kind of felt, yeah, but it'd be worth rescuing 2 of them if you could.
Right? Yeah. I just wonder if you could possibly rationalise it and say both Lee and Kira are freedom fighters. They're extremist soldiers. They're possibly always thinking of the mission above the lives of individuals.
That's a very good. Yes.
So she might be willing to make those kind of sacrifices, and as we find out later on, other people are willing to make those kind of sacrifices for the greater ideal, i.e. rescuing Lee. So there is that rationalisation. But yeah, exactly the same with me. I immediately bumped in and went, this isn't Star Trek. So I think you'd be like, oh my God, we've got to rescue everyone now. So I think you could interpret that a couple of different ways.
Yeah, definitely. And it is a very tight script. As we said, they go 45 minutes in which to convey a hell of a lot of information. So it's possible they didn't intend to have that note of dismissing everybody else. The next shot we've got a picture of, the 5th picture in this episode, a shot of the surface of Cardassia 4 in daylight which I really appreciate. They could have shot it at night and just done it on an interior set, the way that they previously shot scenes on asteroids or small planets. But no, they've actually gone to what I assume is a quarry. It's got such strong 70s and 80s Doctor Who vibes. Absolutely love it.
Yeah.
And they shot it in daylight, which meant that they also had to shoot to a schedule because they would have had to do it while the light remained roughly the same. I'm impressed that they went to the trouble. They used the budget and they used the time and all the efforts that it took to go onto a location and shoot instead of using one of the many Star Trek indoor cave sets that TNG made use of.
Which we have seen in other episodes as well, like Battle Lines used some internal cave sets, and forgive me, Vortex also used some internal cave sets.
There's a scene in Move Along Home where they're edging along a ridge in an internal cave set.
There we go. So it does happen many times. They really do. But no, you're absolutely right. And the moment the scene started, I thought, this looks fantastic. It's big. It's in daylight. You've got multiple extras over a really broad space, amount of space. There's weird sci-fi crap on the ground. There's a whole fence system going on. There's a nice matte painting here. I loved it.
I really like that the symbols that you can see there, the standing posts, form the security fence.
Yes.
It's functional. They've thought about what it would look like, why it would be that way, and it's just really nice to see, and it's unusual to see in Star Trek.
It really is, and it's such a wonderful change, as we say, from more tried and tested Trek methods, as you say. Yeah. But this is a great scene, so let's absolutely fly into it.
The next shot is with two Cardassian guards are walking around the area while the dozen exhausted-looking Bajorans are kneeling and putting rocks in baskets, just very generic, sorting minerals. Kira and O'Brien approach, Kira looking very upright and confident, and in the shooting script, it reads, Kira's blouse zipper is pulled down low enough to catch the eye. And I suspect that an Nanar visitor might have fought back against this because at the start of the scene, it's buttoned all the way. There isn't a zip on it anyway, it's buttons, but it's buttoned all the way up. There's it's really low zipped. So whether she fought for that or whether they realised that she's actually going to have to undo some buttons in a bit, and there's only so many buttons you can undo on primetime television.
Yes.
So yeah, fuck you, Rick Berman. Kira asks O'Brien, how do I look? O'Brien responds, I doubt there's a Cardassian alive who could resist you. So they've obviously come up with a plan off screen before arriving.
I also thought that was quite a charming line there from the chief. Very weird. Weird and misplaced, but
he's saying it will function as intended. He's not saying, I know that I couldn't resist
fair enough.
Cardassian guard. It is just, I don't think a Cardassian guard could resist you. I think this plan is going to work.
Okay, that makes more sense.
That's
Thank you,
how I
Kat.
read it anyway.
Yes.
He's very attached to his wife as O'Brien. He wouldn't say anything improper. A Cardassian guard sees them and calls, halt. And then we've got a picture of O'Brien, who puts on a character who's much more relaxed and less professional than his usual Federation self, while Kira does her very best to look seductive while standing perfectly still. It's nice watching these two actors act into a different character while being these characters. I think it works really well, really quickly.
Absolutely. It's refreshing. It's a nice change. And also, I like how quickly they get into those roles, and you can kind of believe it. There's veteran soldier O'Brien and there's veteran freedom fighter Kira. I imagine this is actually quite familiar to them, having
it fits well that they would be very good at this, and that they would quickly come up with a plan, and then they enact it together really well. The chemistry between them is perfect in this scene.
Absolutely got it. Absolutely, yeah. I love this whole sequence.
So O'Brien says, we want to see the prefect. The guard says, what for? And O'Brien scoffs, she has an appointment with him. And the guard says, I used to be stationed on Bajor. O'Brien responds, then you know why the prefect doesn't like to be kept waiting, huh? Which is, it's very unpleasant. It's about an occupied society which had, in this case, Kira's pretending to be a sex worker. And as the scene goes on, it transpires she is very sassy, probably isn't the right word to use, but she's very confident. She knows her own business. She's not going to be pushed around by anybody. But the context is of a people who have been occupied, and some of whom have been used for sex by the Cardassians. So it is, unfortunately, it reads as a very likely situation in world. It doesn't take a lot of explaining, but it's a very unpleasant undertone to it.
Agreed.
The Cardassian guard asked what it would cost him for an appointment, and Kira says, more than you could afford. O'Brien says, 2 strips of gold-pressed latinum, she's all yours. Kira says, he wouldn't know what to do with me. The guard responds that she needs disciplining, and Kira says, for a boy like you, I don't think you're capable of it. And I really love how Kira plays this part. She doesn't decide that this is going to be a stupid person. This isn't someone who is meek or unable to look after themselves. It may be that she has known sex workers who respond like this. She's bold, she's brash, she understands herself, she understands how to look after herself in this situation. I think it speaks well to how the writers and the actress think about sex workers potentially, in that they're not looking to immediately debase a character when she is pretending to be one. I was surprised by how well this is played out, given that it was written in the 90s and how badly sex workers are now and have been thought of by mainstream society.
I would 100% agree with you there. I also thoroughly enjoyed the scene because, yes, it is played, and it could have been played very easily with a very unpleasant dynamic where Kira had to act very out of character in a way that we would not like her to be, and instead she's actually very much in control. You know, the way she argues with O'Brien shows that he's not really in charge, and the guard is just antagonized. She is actually very much in control of this situation in a way that is refreshing, as you
Definitely.
say.
And O'Brien doesn't do anything to play against that role.
Exactly.
He kind of, they're very good improvisers. He's yes-anding. He's just letting her, this is what she does. This is who she is in character. And he's not going to say, hey, behave yourself.
Exactly,
No,
which would be
wonderful.
Unpleasant. So, yeah.
Dennis Bloodknock in chat has just pointed out that if a Bajoran is being seductive, it's a trap.
And thankfully...
Yeah, the guard is being very stupid. The occupation is over.
There's no reason any of this will be happening. Yeah, thankfully he's an idiot.
Bajoran is now free. Why is this? She's obviously not imprisoned by this man, or if she is, she's taking a lot of risks by being very rude to the man who is, who's carrying her, who's bringing her around. So, yeah, you're right. It is quite an obvious trap, and the guard is far too stupid to notice it.
Lucky for us.
Yes, the guard tells O'Brien to step back. He wants to examine what he's paying for. And O'Brien says, sure, but no sampling the merchandise until the sale's complete, okay? Which feels both realistic and is trying to protect Kira in character.
Very good.
The guard tells them to come here. There's a nice little scene of the fence fizzling as they step through it. Kira approaches, and her gait is less military or efficient than it would normally be, but otherwise it's not hugely out of character. She's very defiant. She's not doing a kind of sexy stroll. She is just, Doc Martin striding towards him, which, again, I really like. I like the way that she plays that character. Kira approaches the guard alone. They're both through the force field, but Kira walks up on her own, and the guard says, now, show me why you're worth 2 strips of gold-pressed latinum. She starts unbuttoning her top. He leans in to get a better look, and she hits him upside the head, and then knees him in the crotch. It's great. She knocks him over, then uses her own phaser to take down the other guard who's approaching at a run. It turns into a very nice action sequence very quickly. Which, again, I appreciated. He gets away with absolutely nothing. She doesn't get to be disrespected before she gets to hit him in the face. It's good.
It's perfect delivery. It's like the moment it looks like it's going to get a bit icky, he's a total doofus, he's like, oh. And it's like, well, you deserve to get your face filled in and knacked and thrown to the ground. And he's out. That's it. That is him out of the fight for the rest of this. And then, she lets O'Brien in, her other hand's already reaching for the gun, it's out, another Cardassian's down. It's brilliant. It's a brilliantly orchestrated scene. The chief comes in, nails a guy on a ridge, who goes falling down the ridge. What a brilliant sequence.
Which is wonderful. Again, they're making use of that space that they're in. They've got stunt actors dressed as Cardassian guards up high and then rolling down these very steep ridges. It's no small risk to them.
Absolutely.
It's a great deal of fun. Kira and O'Brien then run past several other Bajorans as Kira approaches one of them and greets him, Lee Nallis. And Lee asks who she is. She says she's Major Kira Nerys and they've come to get him out of there. And Lee's friend, Borum, says, the earring, you got it. And Lee says, I don't understand. My earring was lost. And Borum says, no, I had it smuggled back to Bajor. And O'Brien just says, gentlemen, I suggest you save this discussion for later, okay? So Lee didn't know that he was going to be rescued. He didn't send his earring. One of his friends did it on his behalf. But there's still, even though we've heard the summary, we know that it turns out Lee is not a resistance movement fighter. He's played no part in the overthrowing of the Cardassian occupation, bar shooting one man at an opportune moment. But I like the way that it's played out. That's not made obvious yet. When you've seen the story already and know the plot, it's clear why he makes all the responses that he does. At the moment, it just looks like, oh, one of his friends saved him without telling him about it, maybe to save him the despair of not being rescued if it didn't come about. He could have a lot of reasons for doing it without him knowing.
Absolutely.
It's just... Sorry, Tim.
I was just going to say, it does indeed make sense. Later on in the episode, we realise that Lee is a very passive figure, and a lot of things happen around and to him that he is not at all in control of. And this is absolutely starting it. That I think his fellow prisoners in the camp are determined to rescue the hero, Lee Nallis. That they will actually take the risks to get him out of there. They will smuggle his earring out. It's got to be Lee that gets rescued. And of course, he has no idea because he's Lee Nallis. And all of this stuff just happens to him constantly.
Yeah, he's not observant. He doesn't realise one of his friends has stolen his earring from him. No, you're right. It is, It's only at the end of the episode when you're like, oh my God, it all falls together. And I like that. That was such a satisfactory conclusion when you're like, this poor guy, from the moment we meet him, he has no idea what's going on. And the thing is, you can easily read it as he's modest, or he thought his fighting days were over, or there are good in-world reasons why a hero might be behaving in the ways he behaves.
Yes, the way they keep it utterly hidden from you.
Right. So they now... O'Brien takes out another Cardassian guard who's standing high on a cliff as they all run back towards the shuttle. 4 Cardassian guards in pursuit. O'Brien fends them off with his phaser, and they all crouch behind a rock face, and O'Brien says, we'll never make it back at this rate. Borum tells Kira, take Lee to Bedro. 4 of us will stay behind and hold them off till you reach your ship. Lee says he won't allow this plan, and Borum says, don't you see, we did this for you. Just get him back safely. Which, again... It's Lee's friends. It's the 4 people who are willing to stay back to ensure that he survives, who are demonstrating real leadership and hero done here. He ends up going along with it. And having seen this episode in particular, this bit made me feel angry with Lee. He's lived with these people for years, and he hasn't disabused them of the notion that he is a hero. There's been no night where they've been swapping stories around the campfire, and he's gone, actually... vulnerable with you now, we might die any day in this place. I'm not the hero that you think I am. He's never shared his true self with them. He's allowed them to continue believing what they believe. I think later in the script he kind of dismisses that as it seems to give them hope. But I would have thought that over 10 years, a decade of living with the man, it would have, as you say, Tim, when you start to analyse his actions here, now, it's clear that he's not a leader. He's not doing what Lee Nallis, the hero, would do. So 10 years and they just haven't noticed. He's just kept really quiet and they just assume he's being modest.
If anything, it further proves that the myth around the man can become so great it can utterly obscure the man himself. They just wanted to believe that he was the hero and he never wanted to disabuse them of that belief. And
anything he says to gently dismiss it, they just read as,
modesty. Yeah, and he could go all out and tell them the story he later tells Cisco, but that might destroy their faith. And you wouldn't want to do that to somebody in a prison camp for 10 years. So you can kind of see it.
Yeah, if it gives them a spark of hope, then even though he has absolutely no plans to try and break them out of there, which maybe if he were the man they thought he was, he might.
You'd hope.
But yes, I made note here. The Cardassian guards firing at them in a quarry feels very late 20th century Doctor Who. They eventually get to the shuttle and O'Brien is ready to launch. Kira says that they have to wait for the others. Lee Nallis is obviously with them already, but she wants to wait for the others to get back to the shuttle. O'Brien picks up 2 Gaylord-class warships entering orbit. And Lee Nallis says, Major, you cannot leave those men behind, which is good. He's honourable here. He doesn't want to leave his friends behind. He's not.
100%.
It's not. Yeah, I'm safe. Get the shuttle in the air at all costs. He doesn't want to leave anyone behind. O'Brien gives them just a minute and 30 seconds until the warships are overhead and says, if we don't leave now, we never will. So Kira finally gives in, says, take us home, Chief. So they regretfully have to leave some people behind. So we have a shot of the shuttle flying away from Cardassia 4 and off into space. We cut to black, and the next shot, we don't have a picture of this one. We've got a shot of the next instance of an air door,
we do.
An airlock door opening.
Can I just flag as well?
Yes.
This is something I was watching it with someone, and they pointed out at that point, with the camp already alerted, why didn't they then use the transporters to pull the 4 people out of the rear guard?
Oh my God, you're right, because they're Bajoran. They can identify them from among.
They already know they're there. They're about a kilometre. They could have beamed up 2, 30 seconds later beamed up the other 2, and gotten out there. It would have taken about 25 seconds.
Damn.
I mean, it's right there, right? They could have done it. And I think it's just one of those times when they were hurriedly putting a script together, and it's like, these things, they happen, you know? You could say, oh, no, there was no way they could transport and escape in time.
Maybe they can't. Yeah. No, they can transport while the ship is moving. We know that.
It's happened before in Star Trek. The fence isn't
all the time.
back up. So anyway, I'm sorry. I've completely derailed us with a plot hole. So
no, it's worth pointing out. Thank you to your companion for noticing it.
But no, we are already now back at the station and on to the next scene. So please take us forward.
A DS9 airlock door rolls back, and Bashir and medical staff are already there on the other side of it, waiting to help Lee Nallis as soon as he arrives. And Kira says, careful, he took a phaser hit. Lee Nallis says, Doctor, these people have been prisoners for years. They need medical attention, which again signals that he is a good man. He doesn't want to see the other people forgotten or left behind.
That feels like hero behaviour.
It does, yes.
So we're getting mixed signals.
Yeah, and in that way, he is definitely a good man at this moment, whether it's partly out of guilt at having left some people behind, or whether it is genuinely just, I don't even care about my own injuries, please take care of everyone else. It's a nice moment to have.
Yes.
Bashir calls Dax to have him, Lee, and his assistant beamed to the infirmary, which I think is relatively rare to have characters beamed around the station. Usually, I think they'd like to have characters walk along corridors because conversation can happen. But in this instance, Lee Nallis has taken a shot to the back.
Yeah.
He's crumpling to the floor as the scene goes on. So it makes full sense that they want to get him and the 2 medical staff to the infirmary as soon as possible. But it's unusual, and it's justified by the script.
Definitely.
The next scene is in Sisko's office. Kira enters saying, Commander, I need to talk. And then the 7th picture that we have to show you, Sisko replies at the same time as we see Gold Dukat on his screen. And Sisko, in a light, mild voice, says, Major, I'm glad you could join us. And Dukat's just sitting there with his Mr. Burns steepled fingers.
I mean, he just is sitting in like the textbook villain pose. I mean, nobody really sits like that in the real world. Nobody actually who is a normal person would sit like that. You know, half their face in shadow, the red wall, the big leather chair. I mean, what is this?
You know, the next time I'm in a Zoom meeting and things are not going my way,
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, it quickly signals to us that as well as being a Cardassian, and we have, even if someone watching this episode as the first Deep Space Nine episode they called, we've seen Cardassians on screen, we know what they look like. This is a Cardassian, and he's a villain because he's doing this steepled fingered thing. Kira apologizes and said, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were busy. She goes to wait outside, but Sisko says there's something he wants her to hear. He says, go ahead, Dukat. And Dukat says, Major, and he speaks very slowly and measuredly.
Yes.
Major, I have just informed Commander Sisko that the Cardassian High Command has issued a formal apology to the people of Bajor. We had no idea that Bajoran prisoners were still being held on Cardassia 4. Such detentions are a direct violation of Supreme Directive 2645, and I assure you the camp prefect will be chastised accordingly. This is the first time we've heard of a Supreme Directive, and given that when I Googled Supreme Directive, number 2645 was the first one that came up, I don't think we actually hear of them again.
I think it might have been created for just this episode and then very swiftly forgotten. It's not exactly like the rules of acquisition where it's going to make repeat repeat returns, unfortunately.
It felt like a nice bit of world building.
I thought so.
Supreme brings to mind supremacy, brings to mind the idea of racism, colonization. It fits really well with the idea of something Cardassian society would come up with. But yes, I looked into what it was, and I think it did just refer to the release of Bajoran prisoners when the occupation ended. Kira asks what about the prisoners who were left behind, and she hasn't established yet whether he knows that it was she and O'Brien who rescued the prisoners. So all she knows at this moment, as far as Dukat is concerned, as far as she knows what Dukat knows, is that there were Bajoran prisoners who have now been released. But yeah, she's effectively saying, yeah, I left some people behind. What's happening to them?
Yeah, I did just kind of break in and shoot some of your guys and everything. And yeah, what's going on with that?
Yeah.
Very ballsy move.
But yes, she asks about them, and he says they are already en route to Bajor. And she replies, well, I look forward to their safe return. And Dukat replies, and I hope that our quick response to this unfortunate situation will prove once and for all that Cardassia is no longer your enemy. And the transmission just ends. He really is the consummate politician in this. He's not being emotive. He's not seeking a back and forth. He's not giving them any space to say, oh, and another thing. He's just, we've proven that our will is good. Fare thee well.
Which we know is so counter to every other time we've heard from Dukat, where he's always pushing and prodding and threatening. And other Cardassian officers we've seen are always very abrasive and forward. This is completely the opposite. Dukat is basically reading a pre-prepared statement, which reads like the slimiest, slickiest PR statement from a British government, who's been caught out.
It's nonetheless unambiguous.
Yes.
It includes an apology. It includes a promise that prisoners are going to be released or have already been released and are on their way back to Bajor. It may well be slimy and covering up the fact that he knew damn well that there were still important Bajoran prisoners on Cardassia 4. But as a statement to the Federation, it's fairly watertight. The statement in itself is fine and good and what we would want to hear. But yeah, we don't hear from him again in this episode. So I do wonder, given that they may well have known who Lee Nellis was, he's well known in Bajoran culture and elsewhere. It's established that Sisko knows who he is. We find out in a bit that Bashir knows about him. If Bashir knows about him, hell, everyone in the world has been talking about him because Bashir is clueless. He says he's a history buff in this episode. I'm not buying it. He's just, no. When has Bashir taken time to study history rather than just, doing medicine or shagging? It's not something he does.
Oh no. That is a valid, if grim point. Thank you.
So I anticipate that given we've got 2 more episodes in this arc to go, I suspect the Cardassians are going to play a further role in this. I think there's something underhanded probably going on with them, and I'll be surprised if there isn't.
Well, certainly straight after Dukat dials out, Sisko, Kira says, in tones of outright shock, they've never been so accommodating before. Something is going on.
Characters are visibly surprised by this.
Exactly. And Sisko himself is very suspicious, and he's like, until we know what they are doing or why they're being so accommodating when they never have been before, we've got to look on the bright side. You rescued Lee. The Cardassians are actually returning everyone else from the camp. They're publicly backing down on something that they normally have denied outright. Let's look on the bright side, which is both very positive and also a little bit naive. Like, I would be very suspicious of why Dukat, who has been nothing but a threatening figure, has suddenly been so accommodating.
I suppose it could be read as he's genuinely politically embarrassed. They've been caught
I think that
in
is
an illegal act by the Federation. He wants this to disappear as soon as possible because the impact on Cardassia if Federation trade routes were suddenly to disappear would be major.
This is it.
So it can be read as him genuinely being uncomfortable and just wanting the problem to go away. But yeah, just given what Star Trek is, given who the Cardassians are, I suspect there's more to it.
Perceptive.
The next scene is in the infirmary where Bashir is using a tricorder on Lee's back where he was shot. Lee is leaning forward in the shot. I think he's leaning on a chair and he's not wearing, he's topless. Bashir is treating his upper back. Bashir says that his wound isn't as serious as it looked. He probably had a lot worse. And Lee says, well, actually, this one was bad enough, which we later come to know means he hasn't really received any injuries in war before. He's not accustomed to being shot with a phaser. Bashir's, yes, Lee says one was bad enough. Starts unwrapping the wraps from around his hands, which is just a really nice detail. I assume that those wraps have been in place for a very long time. He's been doing forced labour. He's probably not taking them off day to day. We don't know whether he's had access to clean water. And indeed, until he goes aboard the station, he's very dusty from the work that he's been doing. So I like that as soon as he has the opportunity, he starts unwrapping his weary hands.
Really great.
A really nice action. Bashir says, I've read all about your battle with Gulta Rail. And Lee says, that was a long time ago, very wearily. Bashir says, I consider myself a bit of a history buff. I've put in my notes, of course he bloody does, because it is very Bashir to claim that. But when did Bashir actually pay attention? Well, he didn't read about it. He's not going to have paid attention if someone else was telling him about it, because maybe this is new Bashir. Maybe this is what season 2 is setting up, that actually he is a scholar and a gentleman. He is widely read. He is erudite. He knows things. We've heard it said before that he's a jack of all trades. He knows how to fix a shuttle in a
yes.
Yeah, in a sticky situation. He's learned a lot on the job. He likes to be able to do a bit, but Bajoran history. I don't know. It doesn't feel very. It's not the him that we've known so far, I don't think.
No. What I do like is that he's very in character and that he does not detect the tone of Lee's voice, which is, I don't want to talk about this. And now plows on full puppy enthusiasm. You're a hero. Wow. And it's, oh my God.
Yeah. When Bashir starts talking about Lee's campaigns against the Cardassians, Lee interrupts him saying, Doctor, I think you'll find that others enjoy talking about those days far more than I do. But again, it could be read as modesty. He is also extremely tired. He's just been shot in the back while trying to escape from the camp. He's been stuck in for 10 years. It's reasonable to close down Bashir's puppyish enthusiasm to keep talking.
You could read it many ways, which is great. It gives depth and complexity to somebody we've only just met and the story as a whole. It is good.
Yeah, very much so. The next scene's in Quark's bar, where Lee and Kira are approaching in the background while the camera is in the foreground. There are the hands of two people who are trading blurred objects. We can't see what they are. It's not illicit. It's just two people exchanging money and goods in the foreground. Lee is now wearing clean clothes, and his face and hands are also clean. And Lee says, amazing, I used to work in one of the station's ore processing plants, which is really nice. It reminds us that the Cardassian station, Terok Nor, was a mining station. That's just a really neat way of weaving his history in with what we know or what new viewers are learning of DS9. Sisko says he thinks that he will find things have changed considerably. Odo then walks up, telling him that a transport carrying Minister Jaro has just arrived from Bajor. Sisko suggests that Kira have the honour of welcoming him aboard, so Kira thanks him and leaves. Sisko then walks with Lee and says, if you're hungry, the Replimat has some passable Bajoran food. I loved the fact that he wasn't overselling the quality of the food from the Replimat. It's like, it tastes a bit Bajoran if you don't try too hard.
And it's a bit of a Star Trek trope, isn't it? This whole kind of, replicated isn't exactly the same as fresh made. And I'm like, I don't know if I could tell the difference. You are telling me you've got a magical food maker that makes any food. And you're like, it doesn't taste the same as homemade. And I'm like, I think you're playing this down. I think you're trying to make me feel better that I don't have a magical food maker and that I should actually really appreciate cooking everything in a pan. Like it's the 1840s. Get out of here. But anyway,
that's
sorry.
A really nice cross-time reading of it. I'm just thinking, in Enterprise, there's an episode where they meet the aliens who give them the technology to use replicators, and they replicate. I can't remember which fish it was. It was a fish from the Floridian characters' culture. I don't know. It was a particular kind of fish. It gets cooked, and it's perfect. It's like, I can't barely tell the difference. This is wonderful. So the first time they encounter it, it's great. By the time they've been living with it for a few decades, it's like, it's all right, I guess. Magic food.
You don't know how lucky you are. Don't try and dismiss it to me. But anyway, that's just me getting personally riled.
Well, I do kind of like the way that Sisko plays it down rather than saying, best Bajoran food you've ever tasted. He's not boastful. He's just like, this is what we're working with. And as they arrive at the seating area of the Replimat, some Bajorans look over at them, and one of them stands up from their seat. And Lee says, actually, I'm a bit tired. I think I'd like to see my quarters. Then many more Bajorans walk up and stand silently looking at Lee. Sisko says, it appears you've been recognised, but we cut away before anyone can address them.
Exactly.
The next scene is an airlock corridor, which we've got a picture of because I just really loved the way that the scene opening was shot. It's Jarrow Esser, the minister, walking out of the airlock through two of the huge rolling Cardassian airlock gear doors.
Love them.
And I love how deep this set is. I love that there is a corridor that he can walk through and step through two doors in a row while we are watching him do it. In the previous scene, the door rolls aside, but it's being shot at an angle. There might be no more than 2 feet of space inside of it, for all we know, just room enough for two people to stand and step out. But no, they've built a long corridor, and he's not having a conversation with anyone at this point. It's filmed solely to show that he is arriving and to show off the set. And I just love it. I love the flex there. I love how huge the DS9 set is and what use they make of it.
It is great, isn't it? And I love how much they do use these airlocks because they are wonderful. And I love that the doors actually move as well. Yeah,
and that must be no small risk in terms of if something's moving, it can break. If something's moving, it can fall over.
100%.
It's no risk to have something that is presumably fairly heavy. I mean, it might just be made of something light. It might be plexiglass, and it's just very easy to push and pull forward.
You'd hope,
but I still love the dedication to doing it every time someone arrives. I love it. So Jarrow approaches the camera and Kira, he asks, where is he? And is he all right? And Kira replies, considering what he's been through in the last 10 years. And Jarrow wonders, Lee Nellis alive? Who would ever have imagined? The prophets were kind to you today, Major. She replies, I'd say they were kind to all of us. And this is nice, it's world building. It's the prophets are a big part of Bajoran society. The secular minister is recognizing this to Kira as a fellow Bajoran. Jarrow says, you know, your little adventure made you some enemies in the Chamber of Ministers. And Kira bitterly says, I'm not surprised. All I did was risk my life. And Jarrow goes on to say, what you did today, Major, was declare war on Cardassia. And I've put in my notes, see, Dukat's going to have a further hand in this story. But Jarrow goes on to say that thankfully they declined the invitation. I'm not so sure. They're at least pretending that they're not going to go to war at the moment. But Jarrow continues, officially, I have to warn you that the next time you disobey orders will mean the end of your military career. And I'm like, bet there's loads of DS9 to go. We've got like 7 whole series. I cannot believe that Kira is actually going to lose her rank or that she's never going to misbehave again. They can't fight Kira. Fuck that noise.
You are breaking the rules. You're breaking the Prime Directive, which is that you aren't meant to know that she's got 7 more series.
It's fair. As far as the viewing audience in the 90s know, Nana Visitor might have signed on for 1 episode. She might have said, well, I can be there for the start, but then I've got a film planned. I'm off. So whenever a character is in real danger, they may well die. I think that since Tasha Yar was killed
was going to be my next
generation.
My next example.
Although it's rare, it doesn't often happen. It is completely possible that a character can die, it can leave. Keiko disappeared for several episodes in the previous series. So yeah, Kira could just disappear off the face of the station for quite a while. But yes, Jarrow goes on to say that as a private citizen, I want to thank you for what you've done this day. And Kira, blinking, says, that's good to hear. She's very surprised to be praised by a minister from the government. Back in the Replomat, there's a crowd of Bajorans pushing forward as Odo is holding them back. When he tells them to stay where they are, they do. And he approaches Sisko, and Lee, just as Lee is saying, I'm sorry about this, Commander, Sisko tells him that they're not going to leave until he said a few words. So Lee sighs, smiles jadedly, and says, if that's what it takes. And I really liked this scene. There wasn't a good shot of it on Trek Core, unfortunately, but there's a crowd of around 20, there are 20 or more extras.
Yeah, it looks brilliant.
It does, and they don't just shoot them from behind, which is what I might have expected. They don't just shoot Lee Nellis speaking and then the backs of heads. They shoot them from the front as well, which means that every single one of them has got Bajoran makeup, has got an earring. It's very elaborate, and it must take a lot of time to get that many people through makeup, that many people dressed and made up and earringed, and they did it. And I really appreciate that about DS9. They use crowd scenes to very good effect.
I thought so. It looks really, really good. I think there's another slightly wider shot where you can see the entire Replomat set. And you can see all of the people around it. It's not like other sci-fi shows where 4 people are meant to make up a crowd or the entire population of a planet.
Moves along and they all run along behind.
Yeah. And it's like, well,
and they're not just humans. It's not random humans that have turned up out of interest with minor makeup on. It's people with the Cardassian ridges. So Cardassian Bajoran ridges. Oh.
Yes, definitely distinguish those two, yes. But it also, I think, continues this nice tradition of, for some reason, the Bajorans love to form a crowd. They will immediately all congregate on the promenade to see what's going on, whether it be to try and lynch Odo, a bad time, or to, welcome Lee Nellis, a good time. But there's always a big crowd of people that come and see what's going on.
They seem to be a very community-based people, don't they? You're right. They get, whenever there's an occasion or news, they gather to find out what's happening.
What's going on, and they're all there. It's great. It's great. I love it.
So Lee stands up and says, "It's good to be free. Yeah. It's good to know that after all our years of struggle, Bajor is finally free." And it was at that moment I thought, heck yes, he's been in the Cardassian prison camp for 10 years. He didn't know that Bajor was free. He didn't know the occupation had ever ended. So it must have been tremendous news for this man. Whether he's a hero or not, he is a Bajoran, and his people are finally free of the Cardassians. The crowd murmurs agreement and nods, and Jarrow then approaches saying, "Yes, it's good to be free. Well, it really is you, isn't it?" He approaches Lee Nellis and says, "I'm Minister Jarrow Esser, and I can't tell you how delighted I am to welcome you home." Lee responds, "Believe me, it's a pleasure to be here." And Jarrow quietly, just to him, says, "Would you mind if I address the crowd? You can't expect a politician to give up an opportunity like this." And I enjoyed that. It wasn't subtle. It was the script saying, this is a political politician. Yes. This is a cynical guy who's going to stand up.
A smooth operator.
But I like that bit of world building. I like that it's not just, this is a Bajoran, therefore he is good. No, this is a Bajoran politician, and he is cynical, and he will take advantage of an opportunity when he can.
And at the same time, Lee is happily going to go, "Oh my God, please take this whole situation away from me," which again is giving us more clues as to Lee's character as well.
Yes, definitely. I think at this point we can probably still pin it down to he's exhausted after 10 years of enforced labour.
Of course.
So I think there's not an obvious, something's wrong here. This isn't the guy he's meant to be. It looks right in retrospect, but I think it can just about fly under the radar.
Absolutely.
To me, anyway, in all my naivety.
No naivete.
Yes, I'll read you Jarrow's little speech to the crowd. "Hello, Bajorans. I have only one thing to say to you today. To ask of you, really. Never forget this moment, because I promise you that years from now, your children and your grandchildren will want to know what it was like the day Lee Nellis returned to Bajor." And in the crowd, interestingly, there's no clapping. We've previously seen a crowd of Bajorans clapping on the back of one hand with the front of another. They don't do that here. They've been instructed not to, presumably for sound reasons. But a couple of them punch the air. Yes. There's a couple of fist punches.
I saw that.
Which is just so sweet. It's so 1980s. It's just, yes! It's just kind of cute.
It is a little unusual, definitely. But I think you're absolutely right.
I think the extras were probably just told, look enthusiastic, do not make much noise. They didn't want lots of cheers, they didn't want clapping because there's more dialogue coming. So they just wanted people to be nodding and going, yeah.
You're absolutely right, yeah. And it also then, we cut, I think, very swiftly back to Sisko and Lee looks, for the first time, actually daunted. He looks visibly daunted.
Yes, and just for a moment, Sisko's gaze lingers on him, and his smile starts to fade slightly. If we don't notice it ourselves, we see that Sisko's noticed something in Lee's face.
Yes.
But the other observation I had about this scene is that there's no press present. There's nobody holding a pad. There's nobody holding anything that resembles a camera. There is nobody recording the moment, just lots of people watching it, which I won't do this every single episode, I promise, but it stands in stark contrast to Babylon 5, where the press, the use of the press, the cynicism of the press, the way that press can be used as propaganda, is used very, very heavily in Babylon 5. There are a couple of very irritating journalists. In The Expanse as well, actually. There are a couple of journalists who, again, are extremely annoying to the main characters in the way that they both interact with and present them. But Deep Space Nine doesn't have that yet. I would be interested to know whether Bajor has a press, whether we just assume that information accurately flows, because I don't think we've dealt with propaganda and fake news. Forgive the use of the phrase.
It's a viable description, and it's a good question, and I am going to decline to answer that on the grounds that it may spoil you for future stories, and the
This is
Dukat is also backing me up there saying spoilers. So I'm going to
Well,
say
I'll make the observation that we haven't
it's a
seen
very
it so far.
yeah. You'd think that this, it's like Mandela, for God's sake, walking out of prison
Absolutely.
in the 90s, which would have actually been quite a contemporaneous event. So yeah, it is surprising that they don't have that. And it's just, I happen to be there, and the government happen to be there, and absolutely no reporters happen to be there at all. And it's just, it's not something that I think TNG did a lot of, really. There wasn't really, like,
No, just
journalists
do not have a
popping up.
presence in that world, and I don't think that newspapers do either. In Babylon 5, there's mention of a couple of different newspapers read by different races. We don't have an idea of how news is disseminated in this world, or who owns it, if anyone owns it, and how people get their information, which is very strange in a show about the future, where the exchange of information is often plot relevant.
And it's meant to be like a central tenet of the Federation that, free flow of information, a free press is vital for membership in the Federation. So
no press anywhere.
What's going on there? I don't know.
It just feels like a strange omission, something they've either thought of doing and decided not to yet, or something they hadn't yet considered doing. But let's move on, because it's fast approaching 10 o'clock.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yep.
So we're now in the guest quarters. Linus enters his quarters. Sisko hopes he'll find them satisfactory, and he points out that I've just spent 10 years in a Cardassian labour camp, and he's just happy for a moment's privacy. He leans down and smells a flower that's on the table, which is a rather beautiful little moment. He genuinely just appreciates being there. Sisko, in a very grave voice, says, "Enjoy it while you can. Judging from the crowd on the promenade, a moment may be all you get." And Lee said he thought that he would have been forgotten by now. Sisko says, "Well, apparently you were wrong." And Lee says, "This morning I was a slave, tonight I am a hero."
I love that phrase.
It's a lovely little conversation they have. Sisko remarks that it must be overwhelming, and Lee says, "I tell you what's overwhelming, Commander. It's knowing that something I've waited for my whole life has finally happened. The Cardassians are gone. We won." I was really glad that he mentioned this here, because other than it's wonderful that Bajor is free of the Cardassians, he hasn't asked after anybody yet. He hasn't asked after any family members. He hasn't asked for any news about how Bajor is. This is the first opportunity he's had to do it, I think. And I looked it up. The Cardassian occupation of Bajor lasted 50 years.
Yeah.
So it was his whole life. He grew up under Cardassian occupation. This is the first time in his life that Bajor has been free. It's huge news. So he asks what a free Bajor is like. Sisko says, "I think he'll be pleased for the most part. Bajor lacks strong leadership." And Lee says, "So that's what Kira meant on the runabout. She told me that my return would bring stability to Bajor." And Sisko says that Bajor could use your help, and frankly, so could I. But he then very politely leaves him to get a good night's sleep. They shake hands, and Lee looks at Sisko's hand a moment before shaking it, and says, "It sounds like I'm going to need it." He's clearly hesitant about something. He hasn't made the confession yet, but something is amiss. And Lee sits and sighs heavily as soon as Sisko's gone. And now we've got a lovely little scene in Quark's bar, which, again, I know, unfortunately, from meme culture, I know that this is setting up some action which is going to bear fruit, hopefully later in this series, or if not, a season later. Quark is sitting there, dividing out these slips of gold-plated latinum, 1 for you, for Ron, and 6 for me. And he repeats that a few times, and then tells Ron to stop looking so glum. Payday is supposed to be a time of joy. And Ron says, "I know, brother, but every week it's the same thing. 6 for you and only 1 for me. It's not fair." And I've written in my notes, "Yes, bring on the Romuanism. I've seen the memes." But it's just a really nice way of setting it up. It's telling you a bit more about Rom and Quark and their relationship, how Quark does business, how Ron thinks about that, or is starting to think about that. It's a really sweet little scene, and it's very, very full of character for these two. They have a little exchange. Quark saying, "You're right." And Rom's like, "I am?" Quark says, "Yes, it's not fair." And Rom gets very excited. "It's not?" And Quark says, "Absolutely not." And Rom smiles with huge delight. So Quark then shows it, 1 for you, 7 for me, and repeats a few more times, asks, "Is that better?" Rom then stands up and walks away, and Quark says, "Where are you going?" And Rom says, "To bed, to dream of an equal share of profits."
Yes, exactly.
Bring it, Rom.
Come on, exactly. And even then, Rom should look beyond that. Not even profits, something more, something not so profit focused. But he is at heart a Ferengi, and obviously they are meant to be the worst excesses of space capitalism. So
Yeah, but I love that in this first episode they're starting to show that Ferengi
yes,
culture can be more diverse than that.
yes,
They're not all happy with this arrangement. And Rom isn't saying someday I'll be in charge or you're going to get yours. It's just I want it to be more fair, which coming from a Ferengi is unheard of.
Oh, technically heresy, I think. I don't know if it's actually their religion or not, but yeah, that
It's entirely
hyper.
opposed to their philosophy. Their entire philosophy is built around
Exactly.
personal gain and the acquisition of wealth and the keeping of wealth.
Absolutely.
So I love that they've introduced it this early on in the series, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of Rom. Quark tells him to dream on, and Quark continues to divide up the Latin, so it's continuing 1 for Rom, 7 for him. He hears the door open in the background, and Quark asks, "What is it now?" And then a hooded figure grabs him by the throat. And 3 of them wrestle him to the ground, hold a rag over his mouth to silence him, and brand him on the forehead on camera. And we just see Quark's eyes turn out terrified with a hand over his face. It's a shocking moment, I think.
I think we have a picture
especially
of it.
for a comedy character.
Oh no, we don't. We've got a picture of it after. Sorry, I've cut to it too early.
It's all right. This is the next scene in the infirmary, where we see. We can cut back to it, all right?
Yeah, yes.
We're now in the infirmary, where we open on a shot of Quark with the symbol for the Alliance of Global Unity, aka the circle branded on his head. Bashir, Sisko, Odo, Kira, and Lee Nallis are with him. Why the fuck is Lee Nallis there? He's gone back to his quarters to get some sleep, and suddenly he's been. Why is he in the infirmary?
He has. Actually, I think technically they're still in the bar. If you
I thought they got to this is being treated by Bashir.
I think Bashir has come to him. I think if you go back and look at it, it is still in the bar.
Oh, okay.
But ultimately, there is still, the ultimate question stands. Lee Nallis has no official position. He has no reason to be there. You know,
even if they thought that this was relevant, the man's having the first good night of sleep that he's had in a decade. Why the fuck would you bring him in?
You wouldn't. There is no reason for him to be
there. The only reason he's there is so that someone doesn't have to re-explain this to him later. It's so that he's there to see it happen.
Bingo.
But there isn't any good in-world reason, and it bugs me. It's a little bit shoddy, and I don't expect that from Deep Space Nine. But anyway, Quark is panicking and asking, "Will there be a scar?" And Bashir's telling him to hold still. Quark panics, still panicking. Does that mean yes? I think the very clear kind of message in this scene is Quark is overreacting. Bashir is being patient with him. But to be fair, Quark has been held down and branded. This is a traumatic incident. It's going to be brushed off because the scar is got rid of in seconds. But I think that a lot of TV shows in the 90s and beyond were very guilty of this, that something terrible can happen to someone. And as long as the status quo has been reestablished by the end of the episode, it stops mattering. People don't carry trauma with them. People don't continue to react as if they've just been mugged in their place of work. I would expect someone to be very frightened after that, or to get more security, to do something to respond to it. But I suspect it's not going to happen. I think it's going to be played up as, now something bad happened to Quark, but then it was over and he needs to stop fussing, which is unfortunate, and I think wouldn't be done that way now.
I think you're absolutely right in that it's considering one of those unconscious Trek tropes, which is that all of this is happening within a contained 1 episode universe, and everything will go back to a status quo that we recognise.
Yeah, Worf can be paralysed in 1 episode, but as long as he's regained the full use of his body by the end of it, he'll never be troubled by the memory of it again.
Exactly. In fact, it turns out he recovered because he had this whole set of unknown, never before mentioned Klingon secondary organs. Oh, great. Oh, well, then there was nothing to worry about. Oh, wow, you really cut their legs out from under that story, didn't you? Jesus. But that's Trek, and sometimes it does drop the ball, and even on a boundary pushing show like DS9, these kind of things sadly.
It's still 1993. They're still working within the convention. They're working with the conventions of mainstream television, but they are pushing at the boundaries of it in some places.
It's getting better, and it will continue to get better, I'm pleased to say.
Yes. But yes, I noticed here it's unusual for Bashir to be the straight man in a scene, and that he's usually the one getting overexcited or responding very emotionally to something. It's unusual for him to be the one going, "Look, calm down, you're going to be okay." So I kind of liked that role reversal for him.
It was nice. I also wasn't actually a massive fan of the fact that he didn't have great bedside manner, in that I think it was legitimate that Quark was very worried, And he
He's
could
just
have
kind of
been,
sit still.
yeah,
He wasn't.
could have been a little bit more
technically-
sympathetic.
Yeah, Quark was asking if there'd be any scarring, and Bashir says, "Not if you stay still. The dermal regenerator will work perfectly as long as you do what I'm telling you." Yeah, there isn't any kind of Quark. I know this was upsetting, but it's okay. You're not going to be left with a scar. You're going to be looked after. We're going to make sure you're safe. No, it's just no. Stay still. You're right. It's not very good from him.
It's not. And frankly, just to quickly flash back, those hooded figures looks terrifying. Those masks were awful. They gave real Uncanny Valley vibes, and that freaks me out.
And this is apparently why we've got enhanced security aboard the station. There are now no low security areas, but someone can walk straight onto the promenade into Quark's bar while wearing masks and robes.
Really unusual.
With intent to harm and wielding a weapon that is used for branding somebody. What the?
Yeah.
Anyway. But yes, Sisko asked Quark if he recognized any of his assailants. Of course he didn't. They were all wearing masks. None of them said anything. So he doesn't even know what language. Actually, he wouldn't know what language to speak anyway because of the translators. But it's notable that they waited until Rom had left, I think. And also that if Quark weren't such a grubby little capitalist and actually had a better relationship with his brother, if they'd left together, it probably wouldn't have happened because there are only 3 of them. They couldn't have taken down 2 people. So there is something of, I'm not suggesting that Quark deserved to be attacked for being an absolute dick to his brother, but there is security in having good relations with those around you, is what I'm saying.
Very balanced. I like it.
Sisko tells Odo, "Constable, I want all security personnel put on full alert." Odo says he's already seen to it. Lee asks who's responsible for this. I'm like, they haven't even told him why it's relevant for him to be there. Why the fuck is he here? Why is he here? Why is he listening to this conversation? He doesn't know who the Circle are.
No reason to be there.
No, I don't think anyone's told him, look, you're going to want to be here for this. This is going to be relevant to you in your life. It's just baffling. It's just silly. But yes, Kira explains that an extremist group from Bajor who call themselves the Circle did this. Lee is surprised that Bajorans did this, and he asks why. Kira responds their goal is to rid Bajor of non-Bajorans. Lee asks, hasn't the provisional government tried to stop them? And Kira says they've tried, but the Circle is more organised than the government, which is probably true and is an utter indictment of that government. Quark pipes up with, well, the government better get organised because I intend to sue them for financial compensation. Which, even in context, it is funny. His mind immediately goes to, what can I get out of this?
Yeah, exactly.
Sisko quickly and furiously says, not now, Quark! Like, he's had enough of your bullshit. Cultural sensitivity be damned. Because, I mean, it should be respected, Quark's culture.
Technically, yeah, but it's really hard when Quark's so disagreeable himself all of the damn time.
It's for the poor man's just been attacked. We can't blame him for falling back on his persistent habits. Anyway, Sisko then tells Lee, people have grown impatient with the government's inability to get things done, so they turn to the Circle. And I've made a note that, this feels all too real. It reflects the way that right-wing politics often plays out, both before this was screened and unfortunately today. People who are disillusioned with the government often turn to people who they perceive as wanting to get things done. Kira says we need someone to speak out against these reactionaries, someone the people will listen to. And I've put down, this is why Lee is here plot-wise, so no one has to later. Bashir has finished treating Quark's head, which now looks fine, and Quark's there anxiously feeling his head for marks. It's quite sad. But Quark asks, how do I look? And Kira and Lee are already leaving the room, but she turns back and says, as handsome as ever, and keeps walking. And bless him, Quark takes it as a full-on compliment and just cheers up. She says, really? Licks his teeth. And he's extremely cheerful. He's no longer thinking of revenge or compensation. Just, one happy smile from Kira, and he's immediately better, even though it was meant to be a backhanded compliment.
It's not. It kind of recalibrates that scene to be okay. It started horribly and it turned out to be comedy, so we're okay.
I think tone-wise they do okay with it. I think, as I say, it would be done differently now if someone were mugged in their workplace on a TV series. I expect them to struggle with that, but yeah, for Star Trek, it's fine. Back in Sisko and Jake's quarters, Sisko walks in. The room is already dark, but Jake is still sitting on the sofa. Sisko asks what he's doing up, and I really like this little conversation, so I'm afraid I have spent a lot of time just repeating what is said, but I think sometimes it's important for the context. Jake says he couldn't sleep. Sisko asks him about the date that was supposed to be today, and Jake says it was supposed to be. She couldn't make it. And Sisko cheerfully says, it happens. And Jake tells him she said her father wouldn't let her go out with me. Sisko asks, why not? And Jake replies, because I'm not a Bajoran. Sisko then sighs. He puts his fingers to his eyes and he's facing away from Jake at this moment. The trouble that he's been dealing with all day has come home.
Yes.
And he says, that's not much of a reason. And he just says, oh, Jake, there are some things happening on Bajor. And he crouches down and he puts his arm on the back of the sofa where Jake is sitting and puts his face close to Jake's and says, troubling things. I'm sorry you've become a victim of them. You don't deserve it. Nobody does. And I just love that response from him. I think as a father, as a character, as an example of how one might be wished to behave in these situations. He doesn't leap to blaming the girl. He doesn't leap to blaming her family either. He sees it as a symptom of a wider problem. And he's honest and sad, telling Jake that he is the victim of the current political situation. He's honest with his son about it. He doesn't just try to brush it off with, oh, there'll be other girls, or you don't want to go out with her anyway. He sits with him in his sadness. And I was also aware while watching it, there is the advice of a black man to his black son, and the context of a black boy being told that his race means that he cannot date a girl. It's not what is present here primarily. We don't know what skin colour his girlfriend had. Bajorans have many different skin colours, we've already seen. But just as a cultural touch point, it did spark that in me as an observation. And I think it is just really nicely handled. It's handled with sensitivity. The sadness is very much there. I don't think it would have been out of place for Sisko to feel angry about it, but his son has been hurt by something that racists are bringing about. But no, I really like the way that the relationship is carried out between those two and the way that Sisko responds here. It's very sensitively observed, I think.
And all it does is build even more the stakes of this broader situation, this political situation, this social situation. As you say, it's come home for Sisko and his family, which is deeply uncomfortable. And you're right as well, in a way that even today we could learn a very valuable lesson. It sounds like a preach, but it's not meant to be, which is, why do people think this way? Not that they are wrong to think this way. They could, you could argue that they are, but what is driving people to gravitate to these extreme views and these exclusionary policies? What's actually driving this fear? What's making people react so dramatically? And I think it is the best ethics of the Federation, which is to look for bigger issues. What is the bigger problem? How can we address the root cause rather than treating the symptoms? It's
a really good example of systemic thinking. Where does racism arise from, and how can we tackle it at its root? I think systemic thinking has become, I may be incorrect, it may just be my own political awakening in recent years, but I think thinking about things in terms of beliefs and beliefs, attitudes, actions, thinking of them in terms of the systems in which we live rather than as individual faults, feels like a very modern, very current thing. But it's right here in this scene. It's in the way that Sisko responds to Jake when telling him about what's going on. So yeah, I just really appreciated this little scene.
Brilliant.
I think it was really well placed.
Absolutely brilliant. Loved it. And then weirdly enough, right, Sisko, it's clearly late at night. He's come home with his stack of work and he's like, what are you doing up late, Jake? And then he gets a call and a freighter captain has requested to speak to Sisko. And I'm like, that seems very, I don't know, it's either generous to the captain or really unfair on Sisko that if somebody wants to, they can just call him at any time, even when he's off duty, and just be like, Sisko,
the call comes through from the comms team saying they want to put this guy through. So my guess is that they fielded and triaged the call.
Okay, that would make sense.
Yeah, I think they probably asked him what he was calling about and thought,
we better refer this up. Okay, that makes more sense.
But yes, Sisko says to Jake, time for bed, okay? And Jake blinks sleepily and says, okay, night, Dad, and heads off to bed. But yes, we then get the call from the comms officer. There's a Tigerian freighter docked on Upper Pylon 2, and they want to speak to him. So he speaks to Romar Doek, the executive officer of the Nanut. And on screen, the Tigerian appears. He is a green-skinned alien. They were preparing to leave for the Gamma Quadrant when they found a Bajoran citizen trying to stow away on their ship, and they were hoping that Sisko would know what to do with them. And Lee Nallis then steps into frame. And I think it just cuts to black
It
there.
does.
Yeah, Sisko looks troubled, and then it cuts to black. The next scene, we're in Sisko's office, where Sisko hasn't gone to bed yet, still exhausted. He's gone to speak to Lee in his office. He says the Nanut isn't scheduled to return from the Gamma Quadrant for 2 years. And Lee admits he was actually planning on staying for considerably longer. I won't repeat the entire story that Lee gives, but I'll give a potted summary of it. He basically confesses to Sisko. He tells him the story of the time when, in need of food and water after his resistance cell had been hiding for a long time, he, who had the only phaser in the party, went ahead to scout for resources. He fell down an embankment, and when he got up, he saw a Cardassian coming out of the lake after bathing. The Cardassian suddenly saw him, reached out for his phaser, and Lee managed to grab it first and shot him before. Oh, no, sorry, he used his own phaser to shoot him before he could reach it. One of Lee's companions then arrives and recognized the Cardassian as Gul Zarail. Lee tried to tell them what had happened, that he'd caught the guy bathing. He just shot him on instinct when the guy had tried to attack him. But it's too late. They've already decided that Lee had won a savage struggle with the Gull, and that's the version that they went on to tell everybody that they met. And this spiraled until many other victories were accredited to Lee, none of which he'd taken part in. And he says, my reputation even followed me into the labour camp. My presence alone seemed to inspire my fellow prisoners, and all I'd done was shot an unarmed Cardassian in his underwear. I'll never forget that look on his face as he died. He was so embarrassed. I love that little moment, that little observation from the time when it happened, that it wasn't a fight, it wasn't a man who was battling for his life or battling to keep the occupation in place. It was a guy who was caught bathing. Who was utterly surprised
by a guy who never set out to kill him, who fell down a hill. It's beautiful. I love this whole sequence. I love Richard Baymer's delivery of it as Lee. It's great, and it to me epitomizes everything, which is you can believe these high and mighty ideals, and what's actually underneath the real story is so different. And you buy into the legend because it means more, and you start questioning then what matters more, the truth or the inspiring legend, and that's I think is the whole Lee Nallis question. I love it.
It actually occurs to me that might be why they didn't include a subplot about the press getting involved, because that story about a story getting blown up is already there in the mix. We don't need to conflate it with deliberate propaganda or further propaganda now. Just the way that stories are spread between people is the focus in this one.
That's a really good point. I just realised I haven't said it all. Richard Baymer is a great actor and is best known as a main cast member of Twin Peaks. He is.
I knew he looked familiar.
Yes, he was in Twin Peaks. I've already forgotten his name. He was Ben Horne, Audrey Horne's father.
Oh my goodness, of course he was.
And yes, a sometime bad guy, nemesis, adversary.
It's a very different role. I think I didn't recognise him just because his whole embodiment of the character is extremely different here.
Lee Nallis is a long way from Ben Horne, definitely. But I do think it's testament to Richard Baymer being a wonderful actor.
Very much so.
In this one scene, I was utterly taken in by just this absolutely haunted, baffled guy who was just utterly swept up in a story not of his own making. And that one speech to Sisko was just, I loved it. I loved it. And I thought Baymer delivered it so well. And you can see why he also was very successful as Ben Horne in Twin Peaks. So there you go. A little bit of trivia.
Thank you, Tim. Very much worth knowing. But yes, I also love the way that the story is told. It's delivered with absolute conviction. There's no question that is definitely what happened. He's not trying to weasel out of anything. God, no. This is the truth. And this is why he's been so desperate to try and get away, not only because he's been living a lie for many years, but because he isn't the person they think he is. He isn't necessarily capable of what he's been accredited with doing. Lee tells Sisko that he isn't the man he thinks he is. Sisko replies, but Bajor doesn't need a man. It needs a symbol, and that's what you are. So Sisko recovers extremely quickly after hearing this astonishing news that this legend of a man is not a hero. And Sisko gives him a little speech. He says, no one's asking you to lead troops into battle or to kill 100 Cardassians with your bare hands, but I saw you in front of that crowd on the promenade. They look at you and they see strength and honour and decency. They look at you and they see the best of themselves. Lee replies, but it's all based on a lie. And Sisko says, no, it's based on a legend, and legends are as powerful as any truth. Bajor still needs that legend. And the script says, with simple finality, and Sisko finishes, it needs you. And Lee turned to camera, he closes his eyes as the truth of Sisko's words hit home. But yeah, it's interesting. It is an interesting conclusion for Sisko to come to.
I thought so.
If I were a cynic, I would say it was driven by opportunism. He needs someone of Lee's stature to be down on Bajor, and if Lee suddenly disappears from the picture, Sisko doesn't know what he's going to do next.
It is driven by political necessity, which is not something we normally see as a driving force of a Starfleet main character. They're normally all about the greater good, these unimpeachable ethics of, but the truth,
personal truth, etc.
Exactly.
Very different kinds of truth in the Federation.
And surely, is it not a greater good that Bajor is unified, even if it is under this white lie of Lee Nallis the hero, when it was just Lee Nallis the right place, wrong time?
Yeah.
You know, you could say it is a greater good. The needs of the many Bajorans are outweighed by the needs of the few to know the truth. That is left up to you. That's what I love. You can take away from this what you want. You could see Sisko is being disingenuous by, only aiding and abetting this lie about Lee's origins, or you could say, no, if this secures Bajor's future, it is for the right thing. And it's entirely up to you. I think you can take away from that what you believe.
Very true. But I think either way, he is asking a man who has just been in a prison camp for 10 years to spend the rest of his life working extremely hard to bring Bajor back to stability. It's a huge ask to make of someone who does
Really
have the
is.
political nous that the Lee Nallis of legend has, but to ask a man who isn't interested in political engagement to do it is both risky, and it's a huge ask of a guy who's already suffered a tremendous amount. I do have sympathy with him for wanting to escape.
Yes,
rather than
you really do.
into the war.
You really do.
Yeah, and with there being 2 more episodes to go, I'll be interested in seeing where the lies get them, what falls out of Lee Nallis being elevated to a new position. But we'll carry on. We've got a little bit of script left to go.
Absolutely.
Push to the edge of the episode. We've got the next scene. We've got a nice shot of the exterior of Deep Space Nine from below. It's very nice, very in space. We've then got Ops with Dax at a station and Kira crossing the room. Dax says that the Yelkin transport's ready for departure. Kira opens the mooring clamps on docking bay 6. Sisko exits his office, says Major as he passes Kira, and she understands to follow him. Minister Jaro, his assistant, and Lee have arrived in the turbo lift into Ops. Jaro introduces Lee as Navark. Lee, as of yesterday's unanimous assembly vote. And Lee explains, Navark, there's never been one before. They felt that any existing title was inadequate, so they created a new one for me. I'm interested that the person who wrote this summary on Wikipedia took that to mean it doesn't mean much, that the title isn't worth anything, whereas to me it's they've invented a new very important position because no existing title was sufficiently important.
That was my interpretation. Yeah,
it's odd that someone had. I might go and edit that on Wikipedia later because it's odd that someone had that reading of it, because I don't think that's what was intended.
No, I don't. And especially as we find out what's going to happen next, this now gives Lee a position of authority in the Bajoran militia, which we know is pretty much the sole actual functioning part of the Bajoran government. Is their military.
I don't know anything about the military side of Bajor yet,
except that Major Kira works for them and is, as far as we've seen, the most effective part of it outside of the religion. So we know the 3 standards: the government, the religion, and the militia. And the militia seems to be, if it hires, and works through Major Kira, it must be somewhat effective, right?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
So he has some authority in this position now, which leads into the next revelation.
Yes. They have a little back and forth. Sisko saying that he had thousands of people turned up to greet his ship when it arrived on Bajor. Lee says it was quite a celebration. I wish I could have stayed longer. Sisko asks what stopped you from staying, and Jaro says the Navark needed to return here to assume his new post. He's been made the Bajoran liaison officer to Deep Space Nine. Cisco replies, I already have a liaison officer, and Jarrow says, not anymore, you don't. Kira doesn't have any lines at this point. She's just looking between. She's not even looking with anger. She's just surprised, just shocked. He says, Major Kira is no longer assigned to this post. She's been recalled to Bajor. He glances at her very briefly for the first time in this conversation. Lee looks to Cisco, who looks to Kira, and Cisco and Kira just look shocked, stricken. And then it cuts to black and we get to be continued. I think it's an amazing way to end the episode.
I thought so as well.
Send a major cast member back to Bajor, sorry.
It's astonishing because you don't see it either. Normally an episode is usually telegraphed quite early on. This is the conclusion we're building to, the big fight, the big showdown, the conclusion of the court trial, whatever it is. This comes out of nowhere. Absolutely unprecedented.
It's the second of two big shocks in the episode. Lee Nallas turning out to be an accidental fraud, and Kira being fired after doing the tremendously good job of bringing Lee back.
Exactly. And if you now go back, like we have done with other things, go back and you see the little seeds of it. When Jarrow turned up, and we've always been a bit suspicious of people from the Bajoran government, he is a little bit, listen, you were out of line. We told you not to go. You have made enemies in the ministerial chamber. We don't realise he's talking about himself. He is not a fan of Kira's unpredictability.
I just remember as well, the Wikipedia article, they said that she'd been promoted back onto Bajor. If it's a promotion, we haven't found that out yet.
Yeah.
If she's been given an important position in the government, we haven't heard that. All we know is she's been sent to Bajor. She's been relegated to Bajor.
I would absolutely say that is what is intended. I think that description, again, is not accurate, and it may benefit from your update.
It may be altered in the near future.
Excellent. That's what I like to see. But no, I take the whole thing as this is actually a political punishment.
Yes, I did as well.
Kira is out of control, and I've put a picture up here of Lee looking very. He has a complex expression on his face, one of resignation, slight defiance, concern, fear. There's a lot of expressions on Lee Nallas' face here. And I think the main thing I take is that he is a man, again, put in a situation he didn't want and is not in control of. And the minister now actually has the one he can control on DS9. That is my very cynical interpretation, is that actually Lee Nallas is perfect. The Bajoran government has someone it can control, whereas we know you cannot control Kira Nerys. She will absolutely do what she wants.
Oh, it's a very good point. Although I assume that Jarrow and the other ministers don't yet know that Lee is actually desperately ill-suited to the role. I think if that were in the frame, I think that could have been the case, that they know that he can't act out of line because they'll just expose him. He's got to do what they want because otherwise they could blackmail him. I don't think that is in the frame yet. I think they genuinely think he's up to the task. I giggled earlier because Dennis Bloodknocker said at least Lee can veto the demote Major Kira for insubordination every time it comes up on the agenda.
Thank you, Dennis. It would be helpful. But no.
But yes, I'm really interested to see how this plays out over the next 2 episodes. I've got some predictions or hopes, I guess. That maybe Lee will have a learning curve. He might find a skill or position to which he's well suited and will forge his own direction for the first time in years with a strong sense of purpose, leaving Kira's role for her to resume. I'd expect that to come towards the end of these episodes. If that happens, it's possible that he will be assassinated by the Cardassians because they know that he's been taken from them. They may have been holding him with very good reason, knowing who Lee Nallas is and what that means to Bajor. I think we'll see the Circle either dealt with and disbanded or becoming a big bad for the rest of the season. I don't think they're going to be a long-term problem. I don't think they're going to last for several. I don't know. Maybe they're going to be around for several seasons, or they're going to be a big bad forever. But I kind of assume that they're relatively small fry and are going to be dealt with before the season ends. That would be my guess, anyway. I've put in my notes. I'm not convinced that they're needed to keep the stakes high for the next 6 seasons. There's enough going on between the battling winds, the Cardassians, the Federation. Adding a whole fascist party coming to power might be overkill.
That's really interesting. It's fascinating to see through the eyes of somebody who doesn't know what's coming, and you extrapolate the clues that they're sprinkling, and it could be. Obviously, we're not going to tell you anything. But I can absolutely see why you would draw those conclusions, and it will be very interesting to watch along with you, Kat, and see what you've predicted, what comes true. Wow. So, yes, very conscious we are at 2 hours 20, which is about standard for us. So I will let you quickly kind of, any other conclusions? How do you feel looking back now at the first episode of season 2?
Oh, I'm really glad that we're on to season 2. I'm excited to watch ahead.
Excellent.
But yes, I enjoyed this episode. I'm a bit biased against Lee Nowlis. I think that at this point he's still kind of more of a plot device than a well-established person. But hopefully we've got 2 more episodes to go. If he remains in the story, then he's got time to act of his own accord, to become a person, a Bajoran person, rather than just a symbol of failure. And obviously, I want to get to the next Garak episode as soon as possible, and it seems like Lee Nowlis is just standing in the way of that.
Yes, we are indeed really looking forward to the reintroduction of everyone's favourite Taylor, Simple Taylor. So we will absolutely have to press ahead. Right, really glad you enjoyed it, Kat. And I would like to thank everyone in chat for joining us and all of your wonderful conversation, which is lovely to keep up with, but really difficult when we're also trying to have a conversation. So
I'm sorry that we haven't mentioned more of what you said in our conversation.
Great. It is great. We thoroughly enjoy it. So thank you, Sarah, Nigel, Dennis, and of course Lieutenant Indoor Cat, our loyal bridge crew assistant, very much appreciated, monitoring everything there on the bridge. We shall look forward to being back as soon as possible, next couple of weeks, we hope. And as always, thank you so much for joining us, and we wish you all the very best. Live long and prosper. See you later.
Everyone.